Chapter 23. One of the 40 methods of escape of the Duc de Beaufort. Meanwhile, time was passing on for the prisoner, as well as for those who were preparing his escape. Only for him it passed more slowly. Unlike other men, who enter with ardor upon a perilous resolution and grow cold as the moment of execution approaches, the Duc de Beaufort, whose buoyant courage had become a proverb, seemed to push time before him and sought most eagerly to hasten the hour of action. In his escape alone, apart from his plans for the future, which, it must be admitted, were for the present sufficiently vague and uncertain, there was a beginning of vengeance which filled his heart. In the first place, his escape will be a serious misfortune to Monsieur de Chavigny, whom he hated for the petty persecutions he owed to him. It would be a still worse affair for Mazarin, whom he execrated for the greater offences he had committed. It may be observed that there was a proper proportion in his sentiments toward the governor of the prison and the minister, toward the subordinate and the master. Then Monsieur de Beaufort, who was so familiar with the interior of the Palais Royal, though he did not know the relations existing between the Queen and the Cardinal, pictured to himself, in his prison, all that dramatic excitement which would ensue when the rumor should run from a minister's cabinet to the chamber of Anne of Austria. Monsieur de Beaufort has escaped. While saying that to himself, Monsieur de Beaufort smiled pleasantly and imagined himself already outside, breathing the air of the plains and the forests, pressing a strong horse between his knees and crying out in a loud voice, "I am free." It is true that on coming to himself he found that he was still within four walls. He saw Aramis twirling his thumbs 10 feet from him, and his guards laughing and drinking in the antechamber. The only thing that was pleasant to him in that odious tableau, such as the instability of the human mind, was the sullen face of Grimaud, for whom he had at first conceived such a hatred and who now was all his hope. Grimaud seemed to him an Antinous. It is needless to say that this transformation was visible only to the prisoner's feverish imagination. Grimaud was still the same, and therefore he retained the entire confidence of his superior, Aramis, who now relied upon him more than he did upon himself. For, as we have said, Aramis felt at the bottom of his heart a certain weakness for Monsieur de Beaufort. And so the good Aramis made a festivity of the little supper with his prisoner. He had but one fault. He was a gourmand. He had found the pâtés good, the wine excellent. Now the successor of Père Matot had promised him a pâté of pheasant instead of a pâté of fowl, and Chambertin wine instead of Macon. All this, set off by the presence of that excellent prince, who was so good-natured, who invented so droll tricks against Monsieur de Chavigny and so fine jokes against Mazarin, made for Aramis the approaching Pentecost one of the 4 great feasts of the year. He therefore looked forward to 6 o'clock with as much impatience as the Duke himself. Since daybreak, Aramis had been occupied with the preparations, and trusting no one but himself, he had visited personally the successor of Père Matot. The latter had surpassed himself. He showed Aramis a monstrous pâté, ornamented with Monsieur de Beaufort's coat of arms. It was empty as yet, but a pheasant and 2 partridges were lying near it. Aramis' mouth watered, and he returned to the Duke's chamber rubbing his hands. To crown his happiness, Monsieur de Chavigny had started on a journey that morning, and in his absence Aramis was deputy governor of the chateau. As for Grimaud, he seemed more sullen than ever. In the course of the forenoon, Monsieur de Beaufort had a game of tennis with Aramis. A sign from Grimaud put him on the alert. Grimaud, going in advance, followed the course which they were to take in the evening. The game was played in an enclosure called the Little Court of the Chateau, a place quite deserted except when Monsieur de Beaufort was playing, and even then the precaution seemed superfluous. The wall was so high. There were 3 gates to open before reaching the enclosure, each by a different key. When they arrived, Grimaud went carelessly and sat down by a loophole in the wall, letting his legs dangle outside. It was evident that there the rope ladder was to be attached. This maneuver, transparent to the Duc de Beaufort, was quite unintelligible to Aramis. The game at tennis, which, upon a sign from Grimaud, Monsieur de Beaufort had consented to play, began in the afternoon. The Duke was in full strength and beat Aramis completely. For the guards, who were constantly near the prisoner, assisted in picking up the tennis balls. When the game was over, the Duke, laughing at Aramis for his bad play, offered these men 2 louis d'or to go and drink his health with their 4 other comrades. The guards asked permission of Aramis, who gave it to them, but not till the evening, However, until then he had business, and the prisoner was not to be left alone. 6 o'clock came, and, although they were not to sit down to table until 7 o'clock, dinner was ready and served up. Upon a sideboard appeared the colossal pie with the Duke's arms on it, and seemingly cooked to a tone, as far as one could judge by the golden color which illuminated the crust. The rest of the dinner was to come. Everyone was impatient. Aramis to sit down to table, the guards to go and drink, the Duke to escape. Grimaud alone was calm as ever. One might have fancied that Athos had educated him with the express forethought of such a great event. There were moments when, looking at Grimaud, the Duke asked himself if he was not dreaming, and if that marble figure was really at his service, and would grow animated when the moment came for action. Aramis sent away the guards, desiring them to drink to the Duke's health, and as soon as they were gone shut all the doors, put the keys in his pocket, and showed the table to the prince with an air that signified, "Whenever my lord pleases." The prince looked at Grimaud. Grimaud looked at the clock. It was hardly 6:15. The escape was fixed to take place at 7 o'clock. There was therefore 3/4 of an hour to wait. The Duke, in order to pass away another 1/4 of an hour, pretended to be reading something that interested him, and muttered that he wished they would allow him to finish his chapter. Aramis went up to him and looked over his shoulder to see what sort of a book it was that had so singular an influence over the prisoner as to make him put off taking his dinner. It was Caesar's Commentaries, which Aramis had lent him, contrary to the orders of the governor, and Aramis resolved never again to disobey these injunctions. Meantime he uncorked the bottles and went to smell if the pie was good. At 6:30 the Duke arose and said very gravely, "Certainly, Caesar was the greatest man of ancient times." "You think so, my lord?" answered Aramis. "Yes." "Well, as for me, I prefer Hannibal." "And why, pray, Master Aramis?" asked the Duke. "Because he left no commentaries," replied Aramis, with his coarse laugh. The Duke vouchsafed no reply, but sitting down at the table made a sign that Aramis should seat himself opposite. There is nothing so expressive as the face of an epicure who finds himself before a well-spread table. So Aramis, when receiving his plate of soup from Grimaud, presented a type of perfect bliss. The Duke smiled. "Zounds," he said, "I don't suppose there's a more contented man at this moment in all the kingdom than yourself." "You are right, my Lord Duke," answered the officer. "I don't know any pleasanter sight on earth than a well-covered table, and when, added to that, he who does the honors as the grandson of Henry IV, you will, my Lord Duke, easily comprehend that the honor fairly doubles the pleasure one enjoys." The Duke, in his turn, bowed, and an imperceptible smile appeared on the face of Grimaud, who kept behind Aramis. "My dear Aramis," said the Duke, "you are the only man to turn such faultless compliments." "No, my Lord Duke," replied Aramis, in the fullness of his heart, "I say what I think. There is no compliment in what I say to you." "Then you are attached to me?" asked the Duke. "To own the truth, I should be inconsolable if you were to leave Vincennes." A droll way of showing your affliction. The Duke meant to say affection. "But, my lord," returned Aramis, "what would you do if you got out? Every folly you committed would embroil you with the court, and they would put you into the Bastille instead of Vincennes. Now, Monsieur de Chavigny is not amiable, I allow, but Monsieur du Tremblay is considerably worse." "Indeed," exclaimed the Duke, who from time to time looked at the clock, the fingers of which seemed to move with sickening slowness. "But what can you expect from the brother of a Capuchin monk, brought up in the school of Cardinal Richelieu? Aye, my lord, it is a great happiness that the Queen, who always wished you well, had a fancy to send you here, where there's a promenade and a tennis court, good air, and a good table." "In short," answered the Duke, "if I comprehend you aright, Aramis, I'm ungrateful for having never thought of leaving this place." "Oh, my Lord Duke, 'tis the height of ingratitude, but your Highness has never seriously thought of it." "Yes," returned the Duke, "I must confess I sometimes think of it." "Still by one of your 40 methods, your Highness." "Yes, yes, indeed." "My lord," said Aramis, "now we are quite at our ease and enjoying ourselves. Pray tell me one of those 40 ways invented by your highness. Willingly, answered the Duke. Give me the pie. I am listening, said La Ramee, leaning back in his armchair and raising his glass of Madeira to his lips, and winking his eye that he might see the sun through the rich liquid that he was about to taste. The Duke glanced at the clock. In 10 minutes it would strike 7. Grimaud placed a pie before the Duke, who took a knife with a silver blade to raise the upper crust. But La Ramee, who was afraid of any harm happening to this fine work of art, passed his knife, which had an iron blade, to the Duke. Must I tell you, replied the Duke, on what I most reckon and what I determined to try first? Yes, that's the thing, my lord, cried his custodian gaily. Well, I should hope, in the first instance, to have a keeper an honest fellow like you. And you have me, my lord. Well, having, then, a keeper like La Ramee, I should try also to have introduced to him by some friend or other man who would be devoted to me, who would assist me in my flight. Come, said La Ramee, that's not a bad idea. Capital, isn't it? For instance, the former serving man of some brave gentleman, an enemy himself to Mazarin, as every gentleman ought to be. Then my keeper would begin to trust this man and to depend upon him, and I should have news from those without the prison walls. Ah, yes, but how can the news be brought to you? Nothing easier. In a game of tennis, for example. In a game of tennis? Asked La Ramee, giving more serious attention to the Duke's words. Yes. See, I send a ball into the moat. A man is there who picks it up. The ball contains a letter. Instead of returning the ball to me when I call for it from the top of the wall, he throws me another. That other ball contains a letter. Thus we have exchanged ideas, and no one has seen us do it. The devil it does. The devil it does, said La Ramee, scratching his head. You are in the wrong to tell me that, my lord. I shall have to watch the men who pick up balls. The Duke smiled. But, resumed La Ramee, that is only a way of corresponding. And that is a great deal, it seems to me. But not enough. Pardon me. For instance, I say to my friends, be on a certain day, on a certain hour, at the other side of the moat with 2 horses. Well, what then? La Ramee began to be uneasy. Unless the horses have wings to mount the ramparts and come and fetch you. That's not needed. I have, replied the Duke, a way of descending from the ramparts. What? A rope ladder. Yes, but, answered La Ramee, trying to laugh, a ladder of ropes can't be sent around a ball, like a letter. No, but it may be sent in something else. In something else? In something else? In what? In a pate, for example. In a pate, said La Ramee. Yes. Let us suppose one thing, replied the Duke. Let us suppose, for instance, that my maître d'hôtel, Noirmont, has purchased a shop of Paramado. Well, said La Ramee, shuddering. Well, La Ramee, who is a gourmand, sees his pâtés, thinks them more attractive than those of Paramado, and proposes to me that I shall try them. I consent on condition that La Ramee tries them with me. That we may be more at our ease, La Ramee removes the guards, keeping only Grimaud to wait on us. Grimaud is the man whom a friend has sent to second me in everything. The moment for my escape is fixed, 7 o'clock. Well, at a few minutes to 7. At a few minutes to 7, cried La Ramee, cold sweat upon his brow. At a few minutes to 7, returned the Duke, suiting the action to the words. I raise the crust of the pie. I find in it 2 poniards, a ladder of rope, and a gag. I point one of the poniards at La Ramee's breast, and I say to him, My friend, I am sorry for it, but if thou stirrest, if thou utterest one cry, thou art a dead man. The Duke, in pronouncing these words, suited, as we have said, the action to the words. He was standing near the officer, and he directed the point of the poniard in such a manner, close to La Ramee's heart, that there could be no doubt in the mind of that individual as to his determination. Meanwhile, Grimaud, still mute as ever, drew from the pie the other poniard, the rope ladder, and the gag. La Rami followed all these objects with his eyes, his alarm every moment increasing. "Oh, my lord," he cried, with an expression of stupefaction in his face, "you haven't the heart to kill me." "No, not if thou dost not oppose my flight. But, my lord, if I allow you to escape, I am a ruined man. I will compensate thee for the loss of thy place. You are determined to leave the chateau. By heaven and earth, this night I am determined to be free. And if I defend myself, or cry out, I will kill thee on the honor of a gentleman." At this moment the clock struck. 7 o'clock, said Grimaud, who had not spoken a word. La Rami made one movement, in order to satisfy his conscience. The Duke frowned. The officer felt the point of the poniard, which, having penetrated through his clothes, was close to his heart. "Let us dispatch," said the Duke. "My lord, one last favor." "What?" "Speak, make haste." "Bind my arms, my lord, fast." "Why bind thee?" "That I may not be considered as your accomplice." "Your hands?" asked Grimaud. "Not before me, behind me." "But with what?" asked the Duke. "With your belt, my lord," replied La Rami. The Duke undid his belt and gave it to Grimaud, who tied La Rami in such a way as to satisfy him. "Your feet, too," said Grimaud. La Rami stretched out his legs. Grimaud took a tablecloth, tore it into strips, and tied La Rami's feet together. "Now, my lord," said the poor man, "let me have the poire d'angoisse. I ask for it. Without it I should be tried in a court of justice because I did not raise the alarm. Thrust it into my mouth, my lord, thrust it in." Grimaud prepared to comply with this request, when the officer made a sign as if he had something to say. "Speak," said the Duke. "Now, my lord, do not forget, if any harm happens to me on your account, that I have a wife and 4 children. Rest assured, put the gag in, Grimaud." In a second La Rami was gagged and laid prostrate. 2 or 3 chairs were thrown down as if there had been a struggle. Grimaud then took from the pocket of the officer all the keys it contained and first opened the door of the room in which they were, then shut it and double-locked it, and both he and the Duke proceeded rapidly down the gallery which led to the little enclosure. At last they reached the tennis court. It was completely deserted. No sentinels, no one at any of the windows. The Duke ran to the rampart and perceived on the other side of the ditch 3 cavaliers with 2 riding horses. The Duke exchanged a signal with them. It was indeed for him that they were there. Grimaud, meantime, undid the means of escape. This was not, however, a rope ladder, but a ball of silk cord, with a narrow board which was to pass between the legs, the ball to unwind itself by the weight of the person who sat astride upon the board. "Go," said the Duke. "First, my lord?" inquired Grimaud. "Certainly. If I am caught, I risk nothing but being taken back again to prison. If they catch thee, thou wilt be hung." "True," replied Grimaud. And instantly, Grimaud, sitting upon the board as if on horseback, commenced his perilous descent. The Duke followed him with his eyes, with involuntary terror. He had gone down about 3/4 of the length of the wall when the cord broke. Grimaud fell, precipitated into the moat. The Duke uttered a cry, but Grimaud did not give a single moan. He must have been dreadfully hurt, for he did not stir from the place where he fell. Immediately one of the men who were waiting slipped down into the moat, tied under Grimaud's shoulders the end of a cord, and the remaining 2, who held the other end, drew Grimaud to them. "Descend, my lord," said the man in the moat. "There are only 15 feet more from the top down here, and the grass is soft." The Duke had already begun to descend. His task was the more difficult, as there was no board to support him. He was obliged to let himself down by his hands and from a height of 50 feet. But as we have said, he was active, strong, and full of presence of mind. In less than 5 minutes, he arrived at the end of the cord. He was then only 15 feet from the ground, as the gentleman below had told him. He let go the rope and fell upon his feet, without receiving any injury. He instantly began to climb up the slope of the moat, on the top of which he met de Rochefort. The other two gentlemen were unknown to him. Grimaud, in a swoon, was tied securely to a horse. "Gentlemen," said the Duke, "I will thank you later. Now we have not a moment to lose. On, then, on. Those who love me, follow me." And he jumped on his horse and set off at full gallop, snuffing the fresh air in his triumph and shouting out, with an expression of face which it would be impossible to describe, "Free, free, free." Chapter 24. The timely arrival of D'Artagnan in Paris. At Blois, D'Artagnan received the money paid to him by Mazarin for any future service he might render the cardinal. From Blois to Paris was a journey of 4 days for ordinary travelers, but D'Artagnan arrived on the 3rd day at the Barrière Saint-Denis. In turning the corner of the Rue Montmartre, in order to reach the Rue Tiquetonne and the Hôtel de la Chevrette, where he had appointed Porthos to meet him, he saw at one of the windows of the hotel that friend himself dressed in a sky-blue waistcoat, embroidered with silver and gaping, till he showed every one of his white teeth, whilst the people passing by admiringly gazed at this gentleman so handsome and so rich, who seemed to weary of his riches and his greatness. D'Artagnan and Planchet had hardly turned the corner when Porthos recognized them. "Hey, D'Artagnan," he cried, "thank God you have come." "Hey, good day, dear friend," replied D'Artagnan. Porthos came down at once to the threshold of the hotel. "Ah, my dear friend," he cried, "what bad stabling for my horses here." "Indeed," said D'Artagnan, "I am most unhappy to hear it, on account of those fine animals." "And I was also wretchedly off," he answered, moving backward and forward as he spoke. "And had it not been for the hostess," he added, with his air of vulgar self-complacency, "who is very agreeable and understands a joke, I should have got a lodging elsewhere." The pretty Madeleine, who had approached during this colloquy, stepped back and turned pale as death on hearing Porthos's words, for she thought the scene with the Swiss was about to be repeated. But to her great surprise, D'Artagnan remained perfectly calm, and instead of being angry, he laughed, and said to Porthos, "Yes, I understand. The air of La Rue Tiquetonne is not like that of Pierrefonds, but console yourself. I will soon conduct you to one much better." "When will you do that?" "Immediately, I hope." "Ah, so much the better." To that exclamation of Porthos's succeeded a groaning, low and profound, which seemed to come from behind a door. D'Artagnan, who had just dismounted, then saw, outlined against the wall, the enormous stomach of Mouston, whose down-drawn mouth emitted sounds of distress. "And you, too, my poor Monsieur Mouston, are out of place in this poor hotel, are you not?" asked D'Artagnan, in that rallying tone which may indicate either compassion or mockery. "He finds the cooking detestable," replied Porthos. "Why, then, doesn't he attend to it himself, as at Chantilly?" "I, monsieur, I have not here, as I had there, the ponds of Monsieur le Prince, where I could catch those beautiful carp, nor the forest of his highness to provide me with partridges. As for the cellar, I have searched every part and poor stuff I found." "Monsieur Mouston," said D'Artagnan, "I should indeed condole with you had I not at this moment something very pressing to attend to." Then taking Porthos aside, "My dear Du Vallon," he said, "here you are in full dress most fortunately, for I am going to take you to the cardinal's." "Gracious me! Really?" exclaimed Porthos, opening his great wondering eyes. "Yes, my friend." "A presentation? Indeed. Does that alarm you?" "No, but it agitates me." "Oh, don't be distressed. You have to deal with a cardinal of another kind. This one will not oppress you by his dignity. 'Tis the same thing. You understand me, D'Artagnan, a court. There's no court now. Alas! The queen. I was going to say, there's no longer a queen. The queen. Rest assured, we shall not see her. And you say that we are going from here to the Palais Royal. Immediately, only, that there may be no delay, I shall borrow one of your horses." "Certainly, all the 4 are at your service." "Oh, I need only one of them for the time being." Shall we take our valets? Yes, you may as well take Mouston. As to Planchet, he has certain reasons for not going to court. And what are they? Oh, he doesn't stand well with his eminence. Mouston, said Porthos, settle Vulcan and Bayard. And for myself, monsieur, shall I settle Rustord? No, take a more stylish horse, Phoebus or Superb. We are going with some ceremony. Ah, said Mouston, breathing more freely. You are only going, then, to make a visit. Oh, yes, of course, Mouston, nothing else. But to avoid risk, put the pistols in the holsters. You will find mine on my saddle, already loaded. Mouston breathed a sigh. He couldn't understand visits of ceremony made under arms. Indeed, said Porthos, looking complacently at his old lackey as he went away. You are right, D'Artagnan. Mouston will do. Mouston has a very fine appearance. D'Artagnan smiled. But you, my friend, are you not going to change your dress? They set out on Vulcan and Bayard, followed by Mouston on Phoebus, and arrived at the Palais Royal at about 7:15. The streets were crowded, for it was the day of Pentecost, and the crowd looked in wonder at these two cavaliers, one as fresh as if he had come out of a bandbox, the other so covered with dust that he looked as if he had but just come off a field of battle. Mouston also attracted attention, and as the romance of Don Quixote was in the fashion, they said that he was Sancho, who, after having lost one master, had found two. On reaching the palace, D'Artagnan sent to his eminence the letter in which he had been ordered to return without delay. He was soon ordered to the presence of the cardinal. Courage, he whispered to Porthos as they proceeded. Do not be intimidated. Believe me, the eye of the eagle is closed forever. We have only the vulture to deal with. Hold yourself as bolt upright as on the day of the bastion of Saint Gervais, and do not bow too low to this Italian. That might give him a poor idea of you. Good, answered Porthos. Good. Mazarin was in his study, working at a list of pensions and benefices, of which he was trying to reduce the number. He saw D'Artagnan and Porthos enter with internal pleasure, yet showed no joy in his countenance. Ah, is it? Monsieur the Lieutenant, you have been very prompt. 'Tis well. Welcome to ye. Thanks, my lord. Here I am at your eminence's service, as well as Monsieur du Vallon, one of my old friends, who used to conceal his nobility under the name of Porthos. Porthos bowed to the cardinal. The best swordsman in the kingdom, my lord, said D'Artagnan. Porthos bowed to his friend. Mazarin was as fond of fine soldiers as, in later times, Frederick of Prussia used to be. He admired the strong hands, the broad shoulders, and the steady eye of Porthos. He seemed to see before him the salvation of his administration and of the kingdom, sculptured in flesh and bone. He remembered that the old association of musketeers was composed of 4 persons. And your 2 other friends? He asked. Porthos opened his mouth, thinking it a good opportunity to put in a word in his tone. D'Artagnan checked him by a glance from a corner of his eye. They are prevented at this moment, but will join us later. Mazarin coughed a little. And this gentleman, being disengaged, takes to the service willingly, he asked. Yes, my lord, and from pure devotion to the cause, for Monsieur de Bracia is rich. Rich, said Mazarin, whom that single word always inspired with a great respect. 50,000 francs a year, said Porthos. These were the first words he had spoken. From pure zeal, resumed Mazarin, with his artful smile, from pure zeal and devotion, then. My lord has, perhaps, no faith in those words, said D'Artagnan. Have you, Monsieur le Gascon? Asked Mazarin, supporting his elbows on his desk and his chin on his hands. Aye, replied the Gascon. I believe in devotion as a word at one's baptism, for instance, which naturally comes before one's proper name. Every one is naturally more or less devout, certainly, but there should be at the end of one's devotion something to gain. And your friend, for instance, what does he expect to have at the end of his devotion? Well, my lord, my friend has 3 magnificent estates, that of Vallon, at Corbeil, that of Brescia in the Soissonnais, and that of Pierrefonds in the Valois. Now, my lord, he would like to have one of his 3 estates erected into a barony. Only that, said Mazarin, his eyes twinkling with joy on seeing that he could pay for Porthos's devotion without opening his purse. Only that can be managed. I shall be baron, explained Porthos, stepping forward. I told you so, said D'Artagnan, checking him with his hand, and now his eminence confirms it. And you, Monsieur D'Artagnan, what do you want? My lord, said D'Artagnan, it is 20 years since Cardinal de Richelieu made me lieutenant. Yes, and you would be gratified if Cardinal Mazarin should make you captain. D'Artagnan bowed. Well, that is not impossible. We will see. Gentlemen, we will see. Now, Monsieur de Vallon, said Mazarin, what service do you prefer, in the town or in the country? Porthos opened his mouth to reply. My lord, said D'Artagnan, Monsieur de Vallon is like me. He prefers service extraordinary, that is to say, enterprises that are considered mad and impossible. That boastfulness was not displeasing to Mazarin. He fell into meditation. And yet, he said, I must admit that I sent for you to appoint you to quiet service. I have certain apprehensions. Well, what is the meaning of that? In fact, a great noise was heard in the antechamber. At the same time, the door of the study was burst open and a man, covered with dust, rushed into it, exclaiming, My lord the Cardinal! My lord the Cardinal! Mazarin thought that someone was going to assassinate him, and he drew back, pushing his chair on the casters. D'Artagnan and Porthos moved so as to plant themselves between the person entering and the cardinal. Well, sir, exclaimed Mazarin, what's the matter? And why do you rush in here, as if you were about to penetrate a crowded marketplace? My lord, replied the messenger, I wish to speak to your eminence in secret. I am Monsieur Dupoins, an officer in the guards, on duty at the dungeon of Vincennes. Mazarin, perceiving by the paleness and agitation of the messenger that he had something of importance to say, made a sign that D'Artagnan and Porthos should give place. D'Artagnan and Porthos withdrew to a corner of the cabinet. Speak, monsieur, speak at once, said Mazarin. What is the matter? The matter is, my lord, that the Duc de Beaufort has contrived to escape from the chateau of Vincennes. Mazarin uttered a cry and became paler than the man who had brought the news. He fell back, almost fainting, in his chair. Escaped? Monsieur de Beaufort escaped? My lord, I saw him run off from the top of the terrace. And you did not fire on him. He was out of range. Monsieur de Chavigny, where was he? Absent. And La Aramis was found locked up in the prisoner's room, a gag in his mouth and a poniard near him. But the man who was under him was an accomplice of the Duke's and escaped along with him. Mazarin groaned. My lord, said D'Artagnan, advancing toward the cardinal, it seems to me that your eminence is losing precious time. It may still be possible to overtake the prisoner. France is large. The nearest frontier is 60 leagues distant. And who is to pursue him? Cried Mazarin. I, pardieu. And you would arrest him. Why not? You would arrest the Duc de Beaufort, armed, in the field. If your eminence should order me to arrest the devil, I would seize him by the horns and would bring him in. So would I, said Porthos. So would you, said Mazarin, looking with astonishment at those 2 men. But the Duke will not yield himself without a furious battle. Very well, said D'Artagnan, his eyes aflame. Battle? It is a long time since we have had a battle. Porthos? Battle, cried Porthos. And you think you can catch him? Yes, if we are better mounted than he. Go then, take what guards you find here, and pursue him. And I sign my orders, said Mazarin, taking a piece of paper and writing some lines. Monsieur du Vallon, your barony is on the back of the Duc de Beaufort's horse. You have nothing to do but to overtake it. As for you, my dear lieutenant, I promise you nothing, but if you bring him back to me, dead or alive, you may ask all you wish." "Here I am," smiled Porthos, with his sublime composure. They descended the great staircase, taking with them all the guards they found on their road, and crying out, "To arms! To arms!" and immediately put spur to horse, which set off along the Rue Saint-Honore with the speed of the whirlwind. "Yes, my captain." As they went, the citizens, awakened, left their doors, and the street dogs followed the cavaliers, barking. At the corner of the Cimetière Saint-Jean, D'Artagnan upset a man. It was too insignificant an occurrence to delay people so eager to get on. The troop continued its course as though their steeds had wings. Alas, there are no unimportant events in this world, and we shall see that this apparently slight incident came near endangering the monarchy. Chapter 25. An adventure on the high road. The Musketeers rode the whole length of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine and of the road to Vincennes, and soon found themselves out of the town, then in a forest, and then within sight of a village. The horses seemed to become more lively with each successive step. Their nostrils reddened like glowing furnaces. D'Artagnan, freely applying his spurs, was in advance of Porthos 2 feet at the most. Mouston followed 2 lengths behind. The guards were scattered according to the varying excellence of their respective mounts. From the top of an eminence, D'Artagnan perceived a group of people collected on the other side of the moat, in front of that part of the donjon which looks towards Saint-Maur. He rode on, convinced that in this direction he would gain intelligence of the fugitive. In 5 minutes he had arrived at the place, where the guards joined him, coming up one by one. The several members of that group were much excited. They looked at the cord, still hanging from the loophole and broken at about 20 feet from the ground. Their eyes measured the height, and they exchanged conjectures. On the top of the wall sentinels went and came with a frightened air. A few soldiers, commanded by a sergeant, drove away idlers from the place where the Duke had mounted his horse. D'Artagnan went straight to the sergeant. "My officer," said the sergeant, "it is not permitted to stop here." "That prohibition is not for me," said D'Artagnan. "Have the fugitives been pursued?" "Yes, my officer. Unfortunately, they are well mounted." "How many are there?" "4, and a 5th whom they carried away wounded." "4," said D'Artagnan, looking at Porthos. "Do you hear, Baron? They are only 4. A joyous smile lighted Porthos's face. "How long a start have they?" 2 hours and a quarter, my officer." 2 hours and a quarter. That is nothing. We are well mounted, are we not, Porthos? Porthos breathed a sigh. He thought of what was in store for his poor horses. "Very good," said D'Artagnan. "And now in what direction did they set out?" "That I am forbidden to tell." D'Artagnan drew from his pocket a paper. "Order of the king," he said. "Speak to the governor. Then—" "And where's the governor?" "In the country." Anger mounted to D'Artagnan's face. He frowned, and his cheeks were colored. "Ah, you scoundrel," he said to the sergeant, "I believe you are impudent to me. Wait." He unfolded the paper, presented it to the sergeant with one hand, and with the other took a pistol from his holsters and cocked it. "Order of the king, I tell you. Read and answer, or I will blow out your brains." The sergeant saw that D'Artagnan was in earnest. "The Vendemois road," he replied. "And by what gate did they go out?" "By the Saint-Maur gate." "If you are deceiving me, rascal, you will be hanged tomorrow." "And if you catch up with them, you won't come back to hang me," murmured the sergeant. D'Artagnan shrugged his shoulders, made a sign to his escort, and started. "This way, gentlemen, this way," he cried, directing his course toward the gate that had been pointed out. But, now that the Duke had escaped, the concierge had seen fit to fasten the gate with a double lock. It was necessary to compel him to open it, as the sergeant had been compelled to speak, and this took another 10 minutes. This last obstacle having been overcome, the troop pursued their course with their accustomed ardor, but some of the horses could no longer sustain this pace. 3 of them stopped after an hour's gallop, and 1 fell down. D'Artagnan, who never turned his head, did not perceive it. Porthos told him of it in his calm manner. "If only we 2 arrive," said D'Artagnan, It will be enough, since the Duke's troop are only 4 in number. That is true, said Porthos, and he spurred his courser on. At the end of another 2 hours, the horses had gone 12 leagues without stopping. Their legs began to tremble, and the foam they shed whitened the doublets of their masters. Let us rest here an instant to give these poor creatures breathing time, said Porthos. Let us rather kill them. Yes, kill them, cried D'Artagnan. I see fresh tracks. 'Tis not a quarter of an hour since they passed this place. In fact, the road was trodden by horses' feet, visible even in the approaching gloom of evening. They set out. After a run of 2 leagues, Mouston's horse sank. Gracious me, said Porthos, there's Phoebus ruined. The cardinal will pay you 100 pistoles. I'm above that. Let us set out again at full gallop. Yes, if we can. But at last the lieutenant's horse refused to go on. He could not breathe. One last spur, instead of making him advance, made him fall. The devil, exclaimed Porthos, there's Vulcan founded. Zounds, cried D'Artagnan, then we must stop. Give me your horse, Porthos. What the devil are you doing? By Jove, I am falling, or rather, Bayard is falling, answered Porthos. All 3 then cried, all's over. Hush, said D'Artagnan. What is it? I hear a horse. It belongs to one of our companions, who is overtaking us. That is another thing, said Porthos, and he listened toward the quarter indicated by D'Artagnan. Monsieur, said Mouston, who, abandoning his horse on the high road, had come on foot to rejoin his master. Phoebus could no longer hold out and... Silence, said Porthos. In fact, at that moment a second name was borne to them on the night wind. It is 500 feet from here, in advance, said D'Artagnan. True, monsieur, said Mouston, and 500 feet from here is a small hunting house. Mouston, thy pistols, said D'Artagnan. Porthos, take yours from your holsters. I have them. Not too well. We are out on the king's service. Well, for the king's service we need horses. That is true, said Porthos. Then not a word, but set to work. They went on through the darkness, silent as phantoms. They saw a light glimmering in the midst of some trees. Yonder is the house, Porthos, said the Gascon. Let me do what I please, and do you what I do. D'Artagnan approached quickly, making a sign to his 2 companions to remain a few steps behind. I buy those horses, he said to the groom. The groom turned toward him with a look of surprise, but made no reply. Didn't you hear, fellow? Yes, I heard. Why, then, didn't you reply? Because these horses are not to be sold, was the reply. I take them, then, said the lieutenant, and he took hold of one within his reach. His 2 companions did the same thing. So, cried the groom, they have traversed 6 leagues and have only been unsaddled half an hour. Half an hour's rest is enough, replied the Gascon. The groom cried aloud for help. A kind of steward appeared, just as D'Artagnan and his companions were prepared to mount. The steward attempted to expostulate. My dear friend, cried the lieutenant, if you say a word I will blow out your brains. But, sir, answered the steward, do you know that these horses belong to Monsieur de Montbazon? So much the better. They must be good animals, then. So, I shall call my people. And mine, I've 10 guards behind me. Don't you hear them gallop? And I'm one of the king's musketeers. Come, Porthos, come, Mouston. They all mounted the horses as quickly as possible. Halloo! Hi! Hi! Cried the steward. The house servants, with the carbines. On! Cried D'Artagnan. There will be firing. On! They all set off, swift as the wind. Hey! Cried the steward. Here! Whilst the groom ran to a neighboring building. Take care of your horses, cried D'Artagnan to him. Fire! Replied the steward. A gleam, like a flash of lightning, illumined the road, and with the flash was heard the whistling of balls, which were fired wildly in the air. "They fire like grooms," said Porthos. "In the time of the cardinal, people fired better than that. Do you remember the road to Crèvecoeur, Mouston?" "Ah, sir, my left side still pains me." "Are you sure we are on the right track, Lieutenant?" "Egad, didn't you hear? These horses belong to Monsieur de Montbazon. Well, Monsieur de Montbazon is the husband of Madame de Montbazon. And Madame de Montbazon is the mistress of the Duc de Beaufort." "Ah, I understand," replied Porthos. "She has ordered relays of horses." "Exactly so. And we are pursuing the Duke with the very horses he has just left." "My dear Porthos, you are really a man of most superior understanding," said D'Artagnan, with a look as if he spoke against his conviction. "Pooh!" replied Porthos. "I am what I am." They rode on for an hour, till the horses were covered with foam and dust. "Zounds, what is yonder?" cried D'Artagnan. "You are very lucky if you see anything such a night as this," said Porthos. "Something bright." "I, too," cried Mouston, "saw them also." "Ah, ah, have we overtaken them?" "Good. A dead horse," said D'Artagnan, pulling up his horse, which shied. "It seems their horses, too, are breaking down, as well as ours." "I seem to hear the noise of a troop of horsemen," exclaimed Porthos, leaning over his horse's menere. "Impossible. They appear to be numerous." "Then 'tis something else." "Another horse," said Porthos. "Dead?" "No, dying." "Settled?" "Yes, settled and bridled." "Then we are upon the fugitives." "Courage, we have them." "But if they are numerous," observed Mouston, "'tis not we who have them, but they who have us." "Nonsense," cried D'Artagnan. "They'll suppose us to be stronger than themselves, as we are in pursuit. They'll be afraid and will disperse." "Certainly," remarked Porthos. "Ah, do you see?" cried the lieutenant. "The lights again. This time I, too, saw them," said Porthos. On, forward, forward," cried D'Artagnan, in his stentorian voice. "We shall laugh over all this in 5 minutes." And they darted on anew. The horses, excited by pain and emulation, raced over the dark road, in the midst of which was now seen a moving mass, denser and more obscure than the rest of the horizon. Chapter 26. The rencontre. They rode on in this way for 10 minutes. Suddenly 2 dark forms seemed to separate from the mass, advanced, grew in size, and as they loomed up larger and larger, assumed the appearance of 2 horsemen. "Ah!" cried D'Artagnan. "They are coming toward us." "So much the worse for them," said Porthos. "Who goes there?" cried a hoarse voice. The 3 horsemen made no reply, stopped not, and all that was heard was a noise of swords drawn from the scabbards and the cocking of the pistols with which the 2 phantoms were armed. Porthos understood him, and he and the lieutenant each drew with the left hand a pistol from their bolsters and cocked it in their turn. "Who goes there?" was asked a second time. "Not a step forward, or you're dead men." Hearing these words, the 2 shadows blockaded the road, and by the light of the stars might be seen the shining of their arms. "Back!" shouted D'Artagnan, "or you are dead." 2 shots were the reply to this threat, but the assailants attacked their foes with such velocity that in a moment they were upon them. A 3rd pistol shot was heard, aimed by D'Artagnan, and one of his adversaries fell. As for Porthos, he assaulted the foe with such violence that, although his sword was thrust aside, the enemy was thrown off his horse and fell about 10 steps from it. "Finish, Mouston, finish the work," cried Porthos, and he darted on beside his friend, who had already begun a fresh pursuit. "Well," said Porthos. "I've broken my man's skull," cried D'Artagnan. "And you?" "I've only thrown the fellow down. But hark!" Another shot of a carbine was heard. It was Mouston, who was obeying his master's command. On, cried D'Artagnan. "All goes well. We have the first throw." "Ha! Ha!" answered Porthos. "Behold, other players appear." And in fact, two other cavaliers made their appearance, detached, as it seemed, from a principal group. They again disputed the road. This time the lieutenant did not wait for the opposite party to speak. "Stand aside!" he cried. "Stand off the road." "What do you want?" asked a voice. "The Duke." Porthos and D'Artagnan roared out both at once. A burst of laughter was the answer, but finished with a groan. D'Artagnan had, with his sword, cut in two the poor wretch who had laughed. At the same time Porthos and his adversary fired on each other, and D'Artagnan turned to him. "Bravo! You've killed him, I think." "No, wounded his horse only." "What would you have, my dear fellow? One doesn't hit the bull's-eye every time. It is something to hit inside the ring." "Ho, parbleu, what is the matter with my horse?" "Your horse is falling," said Porthos, reining in his own. In truth, the lieutenant's horse stumbled and fell on his knees. Then a rattling in his throat was heard, and he laid down to die. He had received in the chest a bullet of D'Artagnan's first adversary. D'Artagnan swore loud enough to be heard in the skies. "Does your honor want a horse?" asked Mouston. "Zounds! Want one!" cried the Gascon. "Here's one, your honor." "How the devilest thou two horses?" asked D'Artagnan, jumping on one of them. "Their masters are dead. I thought they might be useful, so I took them." Meantime Porthos had reloaded his pistols. "Be on the qui-vive," cried D'Artagnan. "Here are two other cavaliers." As he spoke, two horsemen advanced at full speed. "Ho! Your honor!" cried Mouston. "The man you upset is getting up." "Why didn't thou do as thou didst to the first man?" said Porthos. "I held the horses. My hands were full, your honor." A shot was fired that moment. Mouston shrieked with pain. "Ah, sir, I'm hitting the other side, exactly opposite the other. This hurt is just a fellow of the one I had on the road to Amiens." Porthos turned around like a lion, plunged on the dismounted cavalier, who tried to draw his sword, but before it was out of the scabbard, Porthos, with the hilt of his, had struck him such a terrible blow on the head that he fell like an ox beneath the butcher's knife. Mouston, groaning, slipped from his horse, his wound not allowing him to keep the saddle. On perceiving the cavaliers, D'Artagnan had stopped and charged his pistol afresh. Besides, his horse, he found, had a carbine on the bow of the saddle. "Here I am!" exclaimed Porthos. "Shall we wait, or shall we charge?" "Let us charge them," answered the Gascon. "Charge!" cried Porthos. They spurred on their horses. The other cavaliers were only 20 steps from them. "For the king!" cried D'Artagnan. "The king has no authority here," answered a deep voice, which seemed to proceed from a cloud, so enveloped was the cavalier in a whirlwind of dust. "'Tis well. We will see if the king's name is not a passport everywhere," replied the Gascon. "See," answered the voice. Two shots were fired at once, one by D'Artagnan, the other by the adversary of Porthos. D'Artagnan's ball took off his enemy's hat. The ball fired by Porthos's foe went through the throat of his horse, which fell, groaning. "For the last time, where are you going?" "To the devil," answered D'Artagnan. "Good. You may be easy. Then you'll get there." D'Artagnan then saw a musket barrel leveled at him. He had no time to draw from his holsters. He recalled a bit of advice which Athos had once given him, and made his horse rear. The ball struck the animal full in front. D'Artagnan felt his horse giving way under him, and with his wonderful agility threw himself to one side. "Ah, this," cried the voice, the tone of which was at once Polish and jeering. "This is nothing but a butchery of horses and not a combat between men. To the sword, sir? The sword." And he jumped off his horse. "To the swords." "Be it so," replied D'Artagnan. "That is exactly what I want." D'Artagnan, in 2 steps, was engaged with a foe whom, according to custom, he attacked impetuously, but he met this time with a skill and a strength of arm that gave him pause. Twice he was obliged to step back. His opponent stirred not 1 inch. D'Artagnan returned and again attacked him. Twice or thrice thrusts were attempted on both sides, without effect. Sparks were emitted from the swords like water spouting forth. At last D'Artagnan thought it was time to try one of his favorite feints in fencing. He brought it to bay, skillfully executed it with the rapidity of lightning, and struck the blow with a force which he fancied would prove irresistible. The blow was parried. "'Sdeath!" he cried, with his Gascon accent. At this exclamation his adversary bounded back and, bending his bare head, tried to distinguish in the gloom the features of the lieutenant. As to D'Artagnan, afraid of some feint, he still stood on the defensive. "Have a care!" cried Porthos to his opponent. "I've still 2 pistols charged." "The more reason you should fire the first," cried his foe. Porthos fired. The flash threw a gleam of light over the field of battle. As the light shone on them, a cry was heard from the other 2 combatants. "Athos!" exclaimed D'Artagnan. "D'Artagnan!" ejaculated Athos. Athos raised his sword. D'Artagnan lowered his. "Aramis!" cried Athos. "Don't fire." "Ah! Ha! Is it you, Aramis?" said Porthos, and he threw away his pistol. Aramis pushed his back into his saddlebags and sheathed his sword. "My son!" exclaimed Athos, extending his hand to D'Artagnan. This was the name which he gave him in former days, in their moments of tender intimacy. "Athos!" cried D'Artagnan, wringing his hands. "So you defend him? And I, who have sworn to take him dead or alive, I'm dishing it, and by you." "Kill me," replied Athos, uncovering his breast, "if your honor requires my death." "Oh, woe is me! Woe is me!" cried the lieutenant. "There's only one man in the world who could stay my hand. By a fatality, that very man bars my way. What shall I say to the cardinal?" "You can tell him, sir," answered a voice which was the voice of high command in the battlefield, "that he sent against me the only 2 men capable of getting the better of 4 men, of fighting man to man, without discomfiture, against the Comte de la Fere and the Chevalier de Herblay, and of surrendering only to 50 men." "50 cavaliers!" cried the Gascon and Porthos. "Look around you, gentlemen, if you doubt the fact," said the Duke. "Hearing the noise of the fight," resumed the Duke, "I fancied you had about 20 men with you, so I came back with those around me, tired of always running away, and wishing to draw my sword in my own cause, but you are only 2. "Yes, my lord, but, as you have said, 2 that are a match for 20, said Athos. "Come, gentlemen, your swords," said the Duke. "Never," added Porthos. Some of the men moved toward them. "One moment, my lord," whispered Athos, and he said something in a low voice. "As you will," replied the Duke. "I am too much indebted to you to refuse your first request. Gentlemen," he said to his escort, "withdraw. Monsieur d'Artagnan, Monsieur du Vallon, you are free." The order was obeyed. D'Artagnan and Porthos then found themselves in the center of a large circle. "Now, D'Herblay," said Athos, "dismount and come here." All 4 once more together. "Friends," said Athos, "do you regret you have not shed our blood?" "No," replied D'Artagnan. "I regret to see that we, hitherto united, are opposed to each other. Ah, nothing will ever go well with us hereafter." "Oh, heaven! No, all is over," said Porthos. "Well, be on our side now," resumed Aramis. "Silence, D'Herblay," cried Athos. "Such proposals are not to be made to gentlemen such as these. 'Tis a matter of conscience with them, as with us." "Meantime, here we are, enemies," said Porthos. "Gramercy! Who would ever have thought it?" D'Artagnan only sighed. Athos looked at them both and took their hands in his. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is a serious business, and my heart bleeds as if you had pierced it through and through. Yes, we are severed. There is the great, the distressing truth. But we have not as yet declared war. Perhaps we shall have to make certain conditions. Therefore, a solemn conference is indispensable." "For my own part, I demand it," said Aramis. "I accept it," interposed D'Artagnan, proudly. Porthos bowed as if in assent. "Let us choose a place of rendezvous," continued Athos, "and in a last interview arrange our mutual position and the conduct we are to maintain toward each other." "Good," the other three exclaimed. "Well, then, the place—" "Will the place where I'll shoot you?" asked D'Artagnan. "In Paris?" "Yes." Athos and Aramis looked at each other. "The place royal, be it so," replied Athos. "When?" "Tomorrow evening, if you like." "At what hour?" "At 10 in the evening, if that suits you. By that time we shall have returned." "Good." "There," continued Athos, "either peace or war will be decided. Honor, at all events, will be maintained." "Alas," murmured D'Artagnan, "our honor as soldiers is lost to us forever." "D'Artagnan," said Athos gravely, "I assure you that you do me wrong in dwelling so upon that. What I think of is that we have crossed swords as enemies. Yes," he continued, sadly shaking his head, "yes, it is as you said, misfortune, indeed, has overtaken us. Come, Aramis." "And we, Porthos," said D'Artagnan, "will return, carrying our shame to the cardinal." "And tell him," cried a voice, "that I am not too old yet for a man of action." D'Artagnan recognized the voice of de Rochefort. "Can I do anything for you, gentlemen?" asked the duke. "Bear witness that we have done all that we could." "That shall be testified to, rest assured. Adieu. We shall meet soon, I trust, in Paris, where you shall have your revenge." The duke, as he spoke, kissed his hand, spurred his horse into a gallop and disappeared, followed by his troop, who was soon lost in distance and darkness. D'Artagnan and Porthos were now alone with a man who held by the bridles two horses. They thought it was Mouston and went up to him. "What do I see?" cried the lieutenant. "Grimaud, is it thou?" Grimaud signified that he was not mistaken. "And whose horses are these?" cried D'Artagnan. "Who has given them to us?" said Porthos. "The Comte de la Fère." "Athos, Athos," muttered D'Artagnan. "You think of everyone. You are indeed a nobleman. Whither art thou going, Grimaud?" "To join the Vicomte de Bragelonne in Flanders, your honor." They were taking the road toward Paris, when groans, which seemed to proceed from a ditch, attracted their attention. "What is that?" asked D'Artagnan. "It is I, Mouston," said a mournful voice, whilst a sort of shadow arose out of the side of the road. Porthos ran to him. "Art thou dangerously wounded, my dear Mouston?" he said. "No, sir, but I am severely." "What can we do?" said D'Artagnan. "We must return to Paris." "I will take care of Mouston," said Grimaud, and he gave his arm to his old comrade, whose eyes were full of tears, nor could Grimaud tell whether the tears were caused by wounds or by the pleasure of seeing him again. D'Artagnan and Porthos went on, meantime, to Paris. They were passed by a sort of courier, covered with dust, the bearer of a letter from the duke to the cardinal, giving testimony to the valor of D'Artagnan and Porthos. Mazarin had passed a very bad night when this letter was brought to him, announcing that the duke was free and that he would henceforth raise up mortal strife against him. "What consoles me," said the cardinal after reading the letter, "is that, at least, in this chase, D'Artagnan has done me one good turn. He has destroyed Bruxelles. This Gascon is a precious fellow. Even his misadventures are of use." The cardinal referred to that man whom D'Artagnan upset at the corner of the Cimetière Saint-Jean in Paris, and who was no other than the Council of Bruxelles. Chapter 27. The four old friends prepared to meet again. "Well," said Porthos, seated in the courtyard of the Hôtel de la Chevrette, to D'Artagnan, who, with a long and melancholy face, had returned from the Palais Royal. "Did he receive you ungraciously, my dear friend?" "I faith, yes, a brute, that cardinal. What are you eating there, Porthos?" "I am dipping a biscuit in a glass of Spanish wine. Do the same." "You are right. Jim Blue, a glass of wine. Well, how has all gone off?" "Yes, I know that," he said, "but give me the particulars." You know, Porthos, I could not give him the particulars without naming our friends. To name them would be to commit them to ruin. So I merely said there were 50 and we were 2. There was firing, nevertheless. I heard, he said, and your swords, they saw the light of day, I presume. I'm a Gascon, said I, only when I succeed. The answer pleased him, and he laughed. That will teach me, he said, to have my guard provided with better horses, for if they had been able to keep up with you, and if each one of them had done as much as you and your friend, you would have kept your word, and would have brought him back to me dead or alive. Well, there's nothing bad in that, it seems to me, said Porthos. Oh, mon Dieu. No, nothing at all. It was the way in which he spoke. It is incredible how these biscuits soak up wine. They are veritable sponges. Jim blew another bottle. The bottle was brought with a promptness which showed the degree of consideration D'Artagnan enjoyed in the establishment. He continued, So I was going away, but he called me back. You have had 3 horses founded or killed, he asked me. Yes, my lord. How much were they worth? Why, said Porthos, that was very good of him, it seems to me. 1,000 pistoles, I said. 1,000 pistoles. Porthos exclaimed, Oh, that is a large sum. If he knew anything about horses, he would dispute the price. For 1,000 pistoles. For 1,000 pistoles, just that amount, the beggar, not one too many. And you have them. They are here. Upon my word, I think he acted very generously. Generously, to men who had risked their lives for him, and besides had done him a great service. A great service? What was that? Why, it seems that I crushed for him a Parliament councillor. What? That little man in black that you upset at the corner of St. Jean's Cemetery. That's the man, my dear fellow. He was an annoyance to the cardinal. Unfortunately, I didn't crush him flat. It seems that he came to himself and that he will continue to be an annoyance. See that now, said Porthos, and I turned my horse aside from going plump onto him. That will be for another time. He owed me for the councillor, the pettifogger. But, said Porthos, if he was not crushed completely. Ah, Monsieur de Richelieu would have said, 500 crowns for the councillor. Well, let's say no more about it. How much were your animals worth, Porthos? Ah, if poor Mouston were here, he could tell you to a fraction. No matter, you can tell within 10 crowns. Why, Vulcan and Bayard cost me each about 200 pistoles, and putting Phoebus at 150, we should be pretty near the amount. There will remain, then, 450 pistoles, said D'Artagnan, contentedly. Yes, said Porthos, but there are the equipments. That is very true. Well, how much for the equipments? If we say 100 pistoles for the 3. Good for the 100 pistoles. There remains, then, 350. Porthos made a sign of assent. We will give the 50 pistoles to the hostess for our expenses, said D'Artagnan, and share the 300. We will share, said Porthos. A paltry piece of business, murmured D'Artagnan, crumpling his note. Pooh, said Porthos, it is always that. But tell me. What? Didn't he speak of me in any way? Ah, yes, indeed, cried D'Artagnan, who was afraid of disheartening his friend by telling him that the cardinal had not breathed a word about him. Yes, surely, he said. He said, resumed Porthos. Stop, I want to remember his exact words. He said, as to your friend, tell him he may sleep in peace. Good, very good, said Porthos. That signified as clear as daylight that he still intends to make me a baron. At this moment 9 o'clock struck. D'Artagnan started. Ah, yes, said Porthos. There's 9 o'clock. We have a rendezvous, you remember, at the Place Royale. Ah, stop. Hold your peace. Porthos, don't remind me of it. 'Tis that which has made me so cross since yesterday. I shall not go." "Why?" asked Porthos. "Because it is a grievous thing for me to meet again those two men who caused the failure of our enterprise." "And yet," said Porthos, "neither of them had any advantage over us. I still had a loaded pistol, and you were in full fight, sword in hand." "Yes," said D'Artagnan, "but what if this rendezvous had some hidden purpose?" "Oh," said Porthos, "you can't think that—" D'Artagnan did not believe Athos to be capable of deception, but he sought an excuse for not going to the rendezvous. "We must go," said the superb Lord of Bracia, "lest they should say we were afraid. We who have faced 50 foes on the high road can well meet 2 in the Place Royale." Yes, but they took part with the princes without apprising us of it. Athos and Aramis have played a game with me which alarms me. We discovered yesterday the truth. What is the use of going today to learn something else?" "You really have some distrust, then," said Porthos. "Of Aramis, yes, since he has become an abbé. You can't imagine, my dear fellow, the sort of man he is. He sees us on the road which leads him to a bishopric, and perhaps will not be sorry to get us out of his way." "Ah, as regards Aramis, that is another thing," said Porthos, "and it wouldn't surprise me at all. Perhaps Monsieur de Beaufort will try, in his turn, to lay hands on us." "Nonsense. He had us in his power, and he let us go. Besides, we can be on our guard. Let us take arms. Let Planchet post himself behind us with his carbine." "Planchet is a frondeur," answered D'Artagnan. "Devil take these civil wars. One can no more now reckon on one's friends than on one's footmen," said Porthos. "Ah, if Mouston were here! There's a fellow who will never desert me. So long as you are rich. Ah, my friend, 'tis not civil war that disunites us. It is that we are each of us 20 years older. It is that the honest emotions of youth have given place to suggestions of interest, whispers of ambition, counsels of selfishness. Yes, you are right. Let us go, Porthos, but let us go well armed. Were we not to keep the rendezvous, they would declare we were afraid. Halloo, Planchet, here, settle our horses. Take your carbine. Whom are we going to attack, sir?" "No one. A mere matter of precaution," answered the Gascon. "You know, sir, that they wish to murder that good counsellor, Broussel, the father of the people." "Really? Did they?" said D'Artagnan. "Yes, but he has been avenged. He was carried home in the arms of the people. His house has been full ever since. He has received visits from the coadjutor, from Madame de Longueville, and the Prince de Conti. Madame de Chevreuse and Madame de Vendôme have left their names at his door. And now, whenever he wishes. Well, whenever he wishes." Planchet began to sing. "Un vent de Français livre matin. J. croix Chouillenois grand contre le Mazarin. Un vent de Français livre matin." "It doesn't surprise me," said D'Artagnan, in a low tone to Porthos, "that Mazarin would have been much better satisfied had I crushed the life out of his counsellor." "You understand, then, monsieur," resumed Planchet, "that if it were for some enterprise like that undertaken against Monsieur Broussel, that you should ask me to take my carbine." "No, don't be alarmed. But where did you get all these details?" "From a good source, so I heard it from Friquet." "From Friquet? I know that name. A son of Monsieur de Broussel's servant, and a lad that, I promise you, in a revolt will not give away his share to the dogs." "Is he not a singing boy at Notre Dame?" asked D'Artagnan. "Yes, that is the very boy. He is patronized by Bazin." "Ah, yes, I know. Of what importance is this little reptile to you?" asked Porthos. "Gad," replied D'Artagnan, "he has already given me good information, and he may do the same again." Whilst all this was going on, Athos and Aramis were entering Paris by the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. They had taken some refreshment on the road, and hastened on, that they might not fail at the appointed place. Bazin was their only attendant, for Grimaud had stayed behind to take care of Mouston. As they were passing onward, Athos proposed that they should lay aside their arms and military costume, and assume a dress more suited to the city. "Oh, no, dear Count," cried Aramis, "is it not a warlike encounter that we are going to?" "What do you mean, Aramis?" "That the place royal is a termination to the main road to Vendemois, and nothing else." "What? Our friends?" "Are become our most dangerous enemies. Athos, let us be on our guard." "Oh, my dear D'Herblay, who can say whether D'Artagnan may not have betrayed us to the cardinal? Who can tell whether Mazarin may not take advantage of this rendezvous to seize us?" "What? Aramis, you think that D'Artagnan, that Porthos, would lend their hands to such an infamy? Among friends, my dear Athos, no, you are right, but among enemies it would be only a stratagem." Athos crossed his arms and bowed his noble head. "What can you expect, Athos? Men are so made, and we are not always 20 years old. We have cruelly wounded, as you know, that personal pride by which D'Artagnan is blindly governed. He has been beaten. Did you not observe his despair on the journey? As to Porthos, his barony was perhaps dependent on that affair. Well, he found us on his road, and will not be barren this time. Perhaps that famous barony will have something to do with our interview this evening. Let us take our precautions, Athos. But suppose they come unarmed? What a disgrace to us." "Oh, never fear. Besides, if they do, we can easily make an excuse. We came stray off a journey and are insurgents, too. An excuse for us. To meet D'Artagnan with a false excuse. To have to make a false excuse to Porthos." "Oh, Aramis," continued Athos, shaking his head mournfully, "upon my soul, you make me the most miserable of men. You disenchant a heart not wholly dead to friendship. Go in whatever guise you choose. For my part, I shall go unarmed. No, for I will not allow you to do so. 'Tis not one man, not Athos only, not the Comte de la Fère whom you will ruin by this amiable weakness, but a whole party to whom you belong and who depend upon you." "Be it so, then," replied Athos sorrowfully, and they pursued their road in mournful silence. Scarcely had they reached by the Rue de la Mule the iron gate of the Place Royale, when they perceived 3 cavaliers, D'Artagnan, Porthos, and Planchet, the 2 former wrapped up in their military cloaks under which their swords were hidden, and Planchet, his musket by his side. They were waiting at the entrance of the Rue St. Catherine, and their horses were fastened to the rings of the arcade. Athos, therefore, commanded Bazin to fasten up his horse and that of Aramis in the same manner. They then advanced 2 and 2, and saluted each other politely. "Now where will it be agreeable to you that we hold our conference?" inquired Aramis, perceiving that people were stopping to look at them, supposing that they were going to engage in one of those far-famed duels still extant in the memory of the Parisians, and especially the inhabitants of the Place Royale. "The gate is shut," said Aramis, "but if these gentlemen like a cool retreat under the trees and perfect seclusion, I will get the key from the Hôtel de Rohan, and we shall be well suited." D'Artagnan darted a look into the obscurity of the place. Porthos ventured to put his head between the railings, to try if his glance could penetrate the gloom. "If you prefer any other place," said Athos, in his persuasive voice, "choose for yourselves. This place, if Monsieur d'Herblay can procure the key, is the best that we can have," was the answer. Aramis went off at once, begging Athos not to remain alone within reach of D'Artagnan and Porthos, a piece of advice which was received with a contemptuous smile. Aramis returned soon with a man from the Hôtel de Rohan, who was saying to him, "You swear, sir, that it is not so?" "Stop," and Aramis gave him a louis d'or. "Ah, you will not swear, my master," said the concierge, shaking his head. "Well, one can never say what may happen. At present we and these gentlemen are excellent friends." "Yes, certainly," added Athos and the other 2. D'Artagnan had heard the conversation and had understood it. "You see," he said to Porthos. "What do I see?" "That he wouldn't swear." "Swear what?" "That man wanted Aramis to swear that we are not going to the Place Royal to fight. And Aramis wouldn't swear." "No. Attention, then," Athos did not lose sight of the two speakers. Aramis opened the gate and faced around in order that D'Artagnan and Porthos might enter. In passing through the gate, the hilt of the lieutenant's sword was caught in the grating, and he was obliged to pull off his cloak. In doing so, he showed the butt end of his pistols, and a ray of the moon was reflected on the shining metal. "Do you see?" whispered Aramis to Athos, touching his shoulder with one hand and pointing with the other to the arms which the Gascon wore under his belt. "Alas, I do," replied Athos with a deep sigh. He entered third, and Aramis, who shut the gate after him, last. The two serving men waited without, but as if they likewise mistrusted each other, they kept their respective distances. Chapter 28. The Place Royal. They proceeded silently to the center of the place, but as at this very moment the moon had just emerged from behind a cloud, they thought they might be observed if they remained on that spot and therefore regained the shade of the lime trees. There were benches here and there. The four gentlemen stopped near them. At a sign from Athos, Porthos and D'Artagnan sat down. The two others stood in front of them. After a few minutes of silent embarrassment, Athos spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "our presence here is the best proof of former friendship. Not one of us has failed the others at this rendezvous. Not one has, therefore, to reproach himself." "Hear me, Count," replied D'Artagnan. "Instead of making compliments to each other, let us explain our conduct to each other, like men of right and honest hearts. I wish for nothing more. Have you any cause of complaint against me or Monsieur de Herblay? If so, speak out," answered Athos. "I have," replied D'Artagnan. "When I saw you at your chateau at Bragelonne, I made certain proposals to you which you perfectly understood. Instead of answering me as a friend, you played with me as a child. The friendship, therefore, that you boasted was not broken yesterday by the shock of swords, but by your dissimulation at your castle." "D'Artagnan," said Athos reproachfully, "you asked for candor, and you have it. You asked what I have against you. I tell you, and I have the same sincerity to show you, if you wish, Monsieur de Herblay. I acted in a similar way to you, and you also deceived me." "Really, monsieur, you say strange things," said Aramis. "You came seeking me to make to me certain proposals. But did you make them?" "No, you sounded me, nothing more." "Very well, what did I say to you?" "That Mazarin was contemptible and that I wouldn't serve Mazarin. But that is all. Did I tell you that I wouldn't serve any other? On the contrary, I gave you to understand, I think, that I adhered to the princes. We even joked very pleasantly, if I remember rightly, on the very probable contingency of your being charged by the cardinal with my arrest. Were you a party man? There is no doubt of that. Well, why should not we, too, belong to a party? You had your secret, and we had ours. We didn't exchange them. So much the better. It proves that we know how to keep our secrets." "I do not reproach you, monsieur," said D'Artagnan. "'Tis only because Monsieur de la Fère has spoken of friendship that I question your conduct." "And what do you find in it that is worthy of blame?" asked Aramis, haughtily. The blood mounted instantly to the temples of D'Artagnan, who arose and replied, "I consider it worthy conduct of a pupil of Jesuits." On seeing D'Artagnan rise, Porthos rose also. These four men were therefore all standing at the same time, with a menacing aspect, opposite to each other. Upon hearing D'Artagnan's reply, Aramis seemed about to draw his sword, when Athos prevented him. "D'Artagnan," he said, "you are here tonight, still infuriated by yesterday's adventure. I believed your heart noble enough to enable a friendship of 20 years to overcome an affront of a quarter of an hour. Come, do you really think you have anything to say against me? Say it then. If I am in fault, I will avow the error." The grave and harmonious tones of that beloved voice seemed to have still its ancient influence. Miles said of Aramis, which had become harsh and tuneless in his moments of ill humor, irritated him. He answered, therefore, "I think, Monsieur le Comte, that you had something to communicate to me at your chateau of Bragelonne, and that gentleman," he pointed to Aramis, "had also something to tell me when I was in his convent. At that time I was not concerned in the adventure, in the course of which you have so successfully estopped me. However, because I was prudent, you must not take me for a fool. If I had wished to widen the breach between those whom Monsieur de Herblay chooses to receive with a rope ladder and those whom he receives with a wooden ladder, I could have spoken out. "What are you meddling with?" cried Aramis, pale with anger, suspecting that D'Artagnan had acted as a spy on him and had seen him with Madame de Longueville. "I never meddle save with what concerns me, and I know how to make believe that I haven't seen what does not concern me. But I hate hypocrites, and among that number I place musketeers who are abbés and abbés who are musketeers. And," he added, turning to Porthos, "here's a gentleman who's of the same opinion as myself." Porthos, who had not spoken one word, answered merely by a word and a gesture. He said yes, and he put his hand on his sword. Aramis started back and drew his. D'Artagnan bent forward, ready either to attack or to stand on his defense. Athos at that moment extended his hand with the air of supreme command which characterized him alone, drew out his sword and the scabbard at the same time, broke the blade in the sheath on his knee and threw the pieces to his right. Then turning to Aramis, "Aramis," he said, "break your sword." Aramis hesitated. "It must be done," said Athos. Then in a lower and more gentle voice, he added, "I wish it." Then Aramis, paler than before, but subdued by these words, snapped the serpent blade between his hands, and then folding his arms, stood trembling with rage. These proceedings made D'Artagnan and Porthos draw back. D'Artagnan did not draw his sword. Porthos put his back into the sheath. "Never," exclaimed Athos, raising his right hand to heaven, "never, I swear before God, who seeth us, and who, in the darkness of this night heareth us, never shall my sword cross yours, never may I express a glance of anger, nor my heart a throb of hatred, at you. We lived together, we loved, we hated together, we mingled our blood together, and too probably, I may still add, that there may be yet a bond between us closer even than that of friendship. Perhaps there may be the bond of crime. For we once did condemn, judge, and slay a human being whom we had not any right to cut off from this world, although apparently fitter for hell than for this life. D'Artagnan, I have always loved you as my son. Porthos, we slept 6 years side by side. Aramis is your brother as well as mine, and Aramis has once loved you, as I love you now and as I have ever loved you. What can Cardinal Mazarin be to us, to 4 men who compelled such a man as Richelieu to act as we pleased? What is such or such a prince to us, who fixed the diadem upon a great queen's head? D'Artagnan, I ask your pardon for having yesterday crossed swords with you. Aramis does the same to Porthos. Now hate me if you can, but for my own part, I shall ever, even if you do hate me, retain esteem and friendship for you. I repeat my words, Aramis, and then, if you desire it, and if they desire it, let us separate forever from our old friends." There was a solemn, though momentary silence, which was broken by Aramis. "I swear," he said, with a calm brow and kindly glance, but in a voice still trembling with recent emotion, "I swear that I no longer bear animosity to those who were once my friends. I regret that I ever crossed swords with you. Porthos, I swear not only that it shall never again be pointed at your breast, but that in the bottom of my heart there will never in future be the slightest hostile sentiment. Now, Athos, come." Athos was about to retire. "Oh, no, no, do not go away," exclaimed D'Artagnan, impelled by one of those irresistible impulses which showed the nobility of his nature, the native brightness of his character. "I swear that I would give the last drop of my blood and the last fragment of my limbs to preserve the friendship of such a friend as you, Athos, of such a man as you, Aramis." And he threw himself into the arms of Athos. "My son," exclaimed Athos, pressing him in his arms. "And as for me," said Porthos, "I swear nothing, but I'm choked. Forsooth, if I were obliged to fight against you, I think I should allow myself to be pierced through and through, for I never loved any one but you in the wide world." And honest Porthos burst into tears as he embraced Athos. "My friends," said Athos, "this is what I expected from such hearts as yours. Yes, I have said it and I now repeat it. Our destinies are irrevocably united, although we now pursue divergent roads. I respect your convictions, and whilst we fight for opposite sides, let us remain friends. Ministers, princes, Kings will pass away like mountain torrents, civil war like a forest flame. But we shall remain. I have a presentiment that we shall. Yes, replied D'Artagnan. Let us still be musketeers, and let us retain as our battle standard that famous napkin of the Bastien Saint-Gervais, on which the great cardinal had 3 fleurs-de-lis embroidered. Be it so, cried Aramis. Cardinalists or frondeurs, what matters it? Let us meet again as capital seconds in a duel, devoted friends in business, merry companions in our ancient pleasures. And whenever, added Athos, we meet in battle, at this word, place royale, let us put our swords into our left hands and shake hands with the right, even in the very lust and music of the hottest carnage. You speak charmingly, said Porthos, and are the first of men, added D'Artagnan. You excel us all. Athos smiled with ineffable pleasure. 'Tis then all settled. Gentlemen, your hands, are we not pretty good Christians? Egad, said D'Artagnan, by heaven, yes. We should be so on this occasion, if only to be faithful to our oath, said Aramis. Ah, I'm ready to do what you will, cried Porthos, even to swear by Mahomet. Devil take me if I've ever been so happy as at this moment. And he wiped his eyes, still moist. Has not one of you a cross? Asked Athos. Aramis smiled and drew from his vest a cross of diamonds, which was hung around his neck by a chain of pearls. Here's one, he said. Well, resumed Athos, swear on this cross, which, in spite of its magnificent material, is still a cross. Swear to be united in spite of everything, and forever, and may this oath bind us to each other, and even, also, our descendants. Does this oath satisfy you? Yes, said they all, with one accord. Ah, traitor, muttered D'Artagnan, leaning toward Aramis and whispering in his ear, you have made us swear on the crucifix of a frondeurs. Chapter 29. The Ferry across the Oise. We hope that the reader has not quite forgotten the young traveller whom we left on the road to Flanders. In losing sight of his guardian, whom he had quitted, gazing after him in front of the royal basilican, Raoul spurred on his horse, in order not only to escape from his own melancholy reflections, but also to hide from Olivain the emotion his face might betray. 1 hour's rapid progress, however, sufficed to disperse the gloomy fancies that had clouded the young man's bright anticipations, and the hitherto unfelt pleasure of freedom, a pleasure which is sweet even to those who have never known dependence, seemed to Raoul to gild not only heaven and earth, but especially that blue but dim horizon of life we call the future. Nevertheless, after several attempts at conversation with Olivain, he foresaw that many days past thus would prove exceedingly dull, and the Count's agreeable voice, his gentle and persuasive eloquence, recurred to his mind of the various towns through which they journeyed, and about which he had no longer anyone to give him those interesting details which he would have drawn from Athos, the most amusing and the best informed of guides. Another recollection contributed also to sadden Raoul. On their arrival at Senories he had perceived, hidden behind a screen of poplars, a little chateau which so vividly recalled that of La Valliere to his mind that he halted for nearly 10 minutes to gaze at it, and resumed his journey with a sigh too abstracted even to reply to Olivain's respectful inquiry about the cause of so much fixed attention. The aspect of external objects is often a mysterious guide communicating with the fibers of memory, which in spite of us will arouse them at times. This thread, like that of Ariadne, when once unraveled, will conduct one through a labyrinth of thought, in which one loses oneself in endeavoring to follow that phantom of the past which is called recollection. Now the sight of this chateau had taken Raoul back 50 leagues westward, and had caused him to review his life from the moment when he had taken leave of little Louise to that in which he had seen her for the first time, and every branch of oak, every gilded weathercock on roof of slates, reminded him that, instead of returning to the friends of his childhood, every instant estranged him further, and that perhaps he had even left them forever. With a full heart and burning head, he desired Olivain to lead on the horses to a wayside inn, which he observed within gunshot range, a little in advance of the place they had reached. As for himself, he dismounted and remained under a beautiful group of chestnuts in flower, amidst which were murmuring a multitude of happy bees, and bade Olivain send the host to him with writing paper and ink, to be placed on a table which he found there, conveniently ready. Olivain obeyed and continued on his way, whilst Raoul remained sitting, with his elbow leaning on the table, from time to time gently shaking the flour from his head, which fell upon him like snow, and gazing vaguely on the charming landscape spread out before him, dotted over with green fields and groups of trees. Raoul had been there about 10 minutes, during 5 of which he was lost in reverie, when there appeared within the circle comprised in his rolling gaze a man with a rubicund face, who, with a napkin around his body, another under his arm, and a white cap upon his head, approached him, holding paper, pen and ink in hand. "Ha! How?" laughed the apparition. "Every gentleman seems to have the same fancy, for no quarter of an hour ago a young lad, well mounted like you, as tall as you and of about your age, halted before this clump of trees and had this table and this chair brought here, and dined here, with an old gentleman who seemed to be his tutor, upon a pie, of which they haven't left a mouthful, and 2 bottles of Macon wine, of which they haven't left a drop, but fortunately we have still some of the same wine, and some of the same pies left, and if your worship will but give your orders." "No, friend," replied Raoul, smiling, "I am obliged to you, but at this moment I want nothing but the things for which I have asked. Only I shall be very glad if the ink prove black and the pen good. Upon these conditions I will pay for the pen the price of the bottle, and for the ink the price of the pie." "Very well, sir," said the host. "I'll give the pie and the bottle of wine to your servant, and in this way you will have the pen and ink into the bargain." "Do as you like," said Raoul, who was beginning his apprenticeship with that particular class of society, who, when there were robbers on the high roads, were connected with them, and who, since highwaymen no longer exist, have advantageously and aptly filled their vacant place. The host, his mind at ease about his bill, placed pen, ink, and paper upon the table. By a lucky chance the pen was tolerably good, and Raoul began to write. The host remained standing in front of him, looking with a kind of involuntary admiration at his handsome face, combining both gravity and sweetness of expression. Beauty has always been and always will be all-powerful. "He is not a guest like the other one here just now," observed mine host Olivain, who had rejoined his master to see if he wanted anything. "And your young master has no appetite." "My master had appetite enough 3 days ago, but what can one do? He lost it the day before yesterday." And Olivain and the host took their way together toward the inn, Olivain, according to the custom of serving men well pleased with their place, relating to the tavern keeper all that he could say in favor of the young gentleman, whilst Raoul wrote on thus: "So, after a 4 hours' march I stop to write to you, for I miss you every moment, and I am always on the point of turning my head as if to reply when you speak to me. I was so bewildered by your departure, and so overcome with grief at our separation, that I am sure I was able to but very feebly express all the affection and gratitude I feel toward you. You will forgive me. So, for your heart is of such a generous nature that you can well understand all that has passed in mine. I entreat you to write to me, for you form a part of my existence, and, if I may venture to tell you so, I also feel anxious. It seemed to me as if you were yourself preparing for some dangerous undertaking, about which I did not dare to question you, since you told me nothing. I have, therefore, as you see, great need of hearing from you. Now that you are no longer beside me, I am afraid every moment of erring. You sustain me powerfully, sir, and I protest to you that today I feel very lonely. Will you have the goodness, sir, should you receive news from Blois, to send me a few lines about my little friend Mademoiselle de la Valliere, about whose health, when we left, so much anxiety was felt? You can understand, honored and dear guardian, how precious and indispensable to me is the remembrance of the years that I have passed with you. I hope that you will sometimes, too, think of me, and if at certain hours you should miss me, if you should feel any slight regret at my absence, I shall be overwhelmed with joy at the thought that you appreciate my affection for and my devotion to yourself, and that I have been able to prove them to you whilst I had the happiness of living with you." After finishing this letter, Raoul felt more composed. He looked well around him to see if Olivain and the host might not be watching him, whilst he impressed a kiss upon the paper, a mute and touching caress, which the heart of Athos might well divine on opening the letter. During this time Olivain had finished his bottle and eaten his pie. The horses were also refreshed. Raoul motioned to the host to approach. threw a crown upon the table, mounted his horse, and posted his letter at Senlis. The rest that had been thus afforded to men and horses enabled them to continue their journey at a good round pace. At Verberie, Raoul desired Olivain to make some inquiry about the young man who was preceding them. He had been observed to pass only 3/4 of an hour previously, but he was well mounted, as the tavern keeper had already said, and rode at a rapid pace. "Let us try and overtake this gentleman," said Raoul to Olivain. "Like ourselves, he is on his way to join the army and may prove agreeable company." It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Raoul arrived at Compiègne. They dined heartily and again inquired about the young gentleman who was in advance of them. He had stopped, like Raoul, at the Hotel of the Bell and Bottle, the best at Compiègne, and had started again on his journey, saying that he should sleep at Noyon. "Well, let us sleep at Noyon," said Raoul. "So," replied Olivain, respectfully, "allow me to remark that we have already much fatigued the horses this morning. I think it would be well to sleep here and to start again very early tomorrow. 18 leagues is enough for the first stage." "The Comte de la Fere wished me to hasten on," replied Raoul, "that I might rejoin the prince on the morning of the 4th day. Let us push on, then, to Noyon. It will be a stage similar to those we travel from Blois to Paris. We shall arrive at 8 o'clock. The horses will have a long night's rest, and at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning we can be again on the road." Olivain dared offer no opposition to this determination, but he followed his master, grumbling. Go on," said he, between his teeth. "Expend your ardor the first day. Tomorrow, instead of journeying 20 leagues, you will travel 10, the day after tomorrow 5, and in 3 days you will be in bed. There you must rest. Young people are such braggarts." It was easy to see that Olivain had not been taught in the school of the Planchets and the Grimauds. Raoul really felt tired, but he was desirous of testing his strength, and, brought up in the principles of Athos and certain of having heard him speak 1,000 times of stages of 25 leagues, he did not wish to fall far short of his model. D'Artagnan, that man of iron, who seemed to be made of nerve and muscle only, had struck him with admiration. Therefore, in spite of Olivain's remarks, he continued to urge his steed more and more, and following a pleasant little path, leading to a ferry, and which he had been assured shortened the journey by the distance of 1 league, he arrived at the summit of a hill and perceived the river flowing before him. A little troop of men on horseback were waiting on the edge of the stream, ready to embark. Raoul did not doubt this was a gentleman and his escort. He called out to him, but they were too distant to be heard. Then, in spite of the weariness of his beast, he made it gallop, but the rising ground soon deprived him of all sight of the travelers, and when he had again attained a new height, the ferry boat had left the shore and was making for the opposite bank. Raoul, seeing they could not arrive in time to cross the ferry with the travelers, halted to wait for Olivain. At this moment a shriek was heard that seemed to come from the river. Raoul turned toward the side whence the cry had sounded, and shaded his eyes from the glare of the setting sun with his hand. "Olivain!" he exclaimed. "What do I see below there?" A second scream, more piercing than the first, now sounded. "Oh, sir!" cried Olivain. "The rope which holds the ferry boat has broken and the boat is drifting. But what do I see in the water? Something struggling." "Oh, yes!" exclaimed Raoul, fixing his glance on one point in the stream, splendidly illumined by the setting sun. "A horse, a rider." "They are sinking!" cried Olivain in his turn. It was true, and Raoul was convinced that some accident had happened and the man was drowning. He gave his horse its head, struck his spurs into its sides, and the animal, urged by pain and feeling that he had space open before him, bounded over a kind of paling which enclosed a landing place, and fell into the river, scattering to a distance waves of white froth. "Ah, sir!" cried Olivain. "What are you doing?" "Good God!" Raoul was directing his horse toward the unhappy man in danger. This was, in fact, a custom familiar to him. Having been brought up on the banks of the Loire, he might have been said to have been cradled on its waves. 100 times he had crossed it on horseback, 1,000 times had swum across. Athos, foreseeing the period when he should make a soldier of the Viscount, had inured him to all kinds of arduous undertakings. "Oh, heavens!" continued Olivain. in despair. "What would the Count say if he only saw you now?" "The Count would do as I do," replied Raoul, urging his horse vigorously forward. But I," cried Olivain, pale and disconsolate, rushing about on the shore. "How shall I cross?" "Leap, coward," cried Raoul, swimming on, then addressing the traveler, who was struggling 20 yards in front of him. "Courage, sir," said he, "courage. We are coming to your aid." Olivain advanced, retired, then made his horse rear, turned it, and then, struck to the core by shame, leaped as Raoul had done, only repeating, "I am a dead man. We are lost." In the meantime, the ferry boat had floated away, carried down by the stream, and the shrieks of those whom it contained resounded more and more. A man with gray hair had thrown himself from the boat into the river, and was swimming vigorously toward the person who was drowning. But being obliged to go against the current, he advanced but slowly. Raoul continued his way and was visibly gaining ground, but the horse and its rider, of whom he did not lose sight, were evidently sinking. The nostrils of the horse were no longer above water, and the rider, who had lost the reins in struggling, fell with his head back and his arms extended. One moment longer and all would disappear. "Courage!" cried Raoul. "Courage!" "Too late," murmured the young man. "Too late." The water closed above his head and stifled his voice. Raoul sprang from his horse, to which he left the charge of its own preservation, and in 3 or 4 strokes was at the gentleman's side. He seized the horse at once by the curb and raised its head above water. The animal began to breathe again, and, as if he comprehended that they had come to his aid, redoubled his efforts. Raoul at the same time seized one of the young man's hands and placed it on the menore, which it grasped with the tenacity of a drowning man. Thus, sure that the rider would not release his hold, Raoul now only directed his attention to the horse, which he guided to the opposite bank, helping it to cut through the water and encouraging it with words. All at once the horse stumbled against a ridge and then placed its foot on the sand. "Saved!" exclaimed the man with gray hair, who also touched bottom. "Saved!" mechanically repeated the young gentleman, releasing the menore and sliding from the settle into Raoul's arms. Raoul was but 10 yards from the shore. They bore the fainting man, and laying him down upon the grass, unfastened the buttons of his collar and unhooked his doublet. A moment later the gray-headed man was beside him. Olivain managed in his turn to land, after crossing himself repeatedly, and the people in the ferry boat guided themselves as well as they were able toward the bank, with the aid of a pole which chanced to be in the boat. Thanks to the attentions of Raoul and the man who accompanied the young gentleman, the color gradually returned to the pale cheeks of the dying man, who opened his eyes, at first entirely bewildered, but who soon fixed his gaze upon the person who had saved him. "Ah, sir," he exclaimed, "it was you? Without you I was a dead man, thrice dead. But one recovers, sir, as you perceive," replied Raoul, "and we have but had a little bath." "Oh, sir, what gratitude I feel!" exclaimed the man with gray hair. "Ah, there you are, my good Darmingers. I have given you a great fright, have I not? But it is your own fault. You were my tutor. Why did you not teach me to swim?" "Oh, Monsieur le Comte," replied the old man, "had any misfortune happened to you, I should never have dared to show myself to the marshal again." "But how did the accident happen?" asked Raoul. "Oh, so, in the most natural way possible," replied he to whom they had given the title of Count. "We were about a third of the way across the river when the cord of the ferry boat broke. Alarmed by the cries and gestures of the boatman, my horse sprang into the water. I cannot swim, and dared not throw myself into the river. Instead of aiding the movements of my horse, I paralyzed them, and I was just going to drown myself with the best grace in the world, when you arrived just in time to pull me out of the water. Therefore, sir, if you will agree, henceforward we are friends until death." "Sir," replied Raoul, bowing, "I am entirely at your service, I assure you." "I am called the Count de Guiche," continued the young man. "My father is a Maréchal de Grandmorne, and now that you know who I am, do me the honor to inform me who you are." "I am the Viscount de Bragelonne," answered Raoul, blushing at being unable to name his father, as the Count de Guiche had done. "Viscount, your countenance, your goodness, and your courage incline me toward you. My gratitude is already due. Shake hands. I crave your friendship." "Sir," said Raoul, returning the Count's pressure of the hand, "I like you already from my heart. Pray regard me as a devoted friend, I beseech you." "And now, where are you going, Viscount?" inquired de Guiche. "To join the army under the prince, Count." "And I, too," exclaimed the young man, in a transport of joy. "Oh, so much the better. We will fire the first shot together." "It is well. Be friends," said the tutor. "Young as you both are, you were perhaps born under the same star and were destined to meet. And now," continued he, "you must change your clothes. Your servants, to whom I gave directions the moment they had left the ferryboat, ought to be already at the inn. Linen and wine are both being warmed. Come." The young men had no objection to this proposition. On the contrary, they thought it very timely. They mounted again at once, whilst looks of admiration passed between them. They were indeed two elegant horsemen, with figures slight and upright, noble faces, bright and proud looks, loyal and intelligent smiles. De Guiche might have been about 18 years of age, but he was scarcely taller than Raoul, who was only 15. Chapter 30. Skirmishing. The halt at Noyon was but brief, every one there being wrapped in profound sleep. Raoul had desired to be awakened should Grimaud arrive, but Grimaud did not arrive. Doubtless, too, the horses on their part appreciated the 8 hours of repose and the abundant stabling which was granted them. The Count de Guiche was awakened at 5 o'clock in the morning by Raoul, who came to wish him good day. They breakfasted in haste, and at 6 o'clock had already gone 10 miles. The young Count's conversation was most interesting to Raoul, therefore he listened much, whilst the Count talked well and long. Brought up in Paris, where Raoul had been but once, at the court, which Raoul had never seen, his follies as page, 2 duels, which he had already found the means of fighting, in spite of the edicts against them, and, more especially, in spite of his tutor's vigilance. These things excited the greatest curiosity in Raoul. Raoul had only been at M. Scarron's house. He named to Guiche the people whom he had seen there. Guiche knew everybody: Madame de Nguyen, Mademoiselle d'Aubigne, Mademoiselle de Scuddy, Mademoiselle Palette, Madame de Chevreuse. He criticized everybody humorously. Raoul trembled, lest he should laugh among the rest at Madame de Chevreuse, for whom he entertained deep and genuine sympathy, but either instinctively or from affection for the Duchess, he said everything in her favor. His praises increased Raoul's friendship twofold. Then came the question of gallantry and love affairs. Under this head, also, Bragelonne had much more to hear than to tell. He listened attentively and fancied that he discovered through 3 or 4 rather frivolous adventures that the Count, like himself, had a secret to hide in the depths of his heart. De Guiche, as we have said before, had been educated at the court, and the intrigues of this court were not unknown to him. It was the same court of which Raoul had so often heard the Comte de la Fere speak, except that its aspect had much changed since the period when Athos had himself been part of it. Therefore everything which the Count de Guiche related was new to his traveling companion. The young Count, witty and caustic, passed all the world in review. The Queen herself was not spared, and Cardinal Mazarin came in for his share of ridicule. The day passed away as rapidly as an hour. The Count's tutor, a man of the world and a bon vivant, up to his eyes in learning, as his pupil described him, often recalled a profound erudition, the witty and caustic satire of Athos to Raoul, but as regarded grace, delicacy, and ability of external appearance, no one in these points was to be compared to the Comte de la Fere. The horses, which were more kindly used than on the previous day, stopped at Arras at 4 o'clock in the evening. They were approaching the scene of war, and as bands of Spaniards sometimes took advantage of the night to make expeditions even as far as the neighborhood of Arras, they determined to remain in the town until the morrow. The French army held all between Pont-de-Marc as far as Valenciennes, falling back upon Douai. The prince was said to be in person at Bethune. The enemy's army extended from Castle to Courtray, and as there was no species of violence or pillage it did not commit, The poor people on the frontier quitted their isolated dwellings and fled for refuge into the strong cities which held out a shelter to them. Arras was encumbered with fugitives. An approaching battle was much spoken of, the prince having maneuvered, until that movement, only in order to await a reinforcement that had just reached him. The young men congratulated themselves on having arrived so opportunely. The evening was employed in discussing the war. The grooms polished their arms. The young men loaded the pistols in case of a skirmish, and they awoke in despair, having both dreamed that they had arrived too late to participate in the battle. In the morning it was rumored that Prince de Condé had evacuated Bethune and fallen back on Cavan, leaving, however, a strong garrison in the former city. But as there was nothing positively certain in this report, the young warriors decided to continue their way toward Bethune, free on the road to diverge to the right and march to Cavan if necessary. The Count's tutor was well acquainted with the country. He consequently proposed to take a crossroad, which lay between that of Lens and that of Bethune. They obtained information at a Blaine, and a statement of their route was left for Grimaud. About 7 o'clock in the morning they set out. De Guiche, who was young and impulsive, said to Raoul, "Here we are, 3 masters and 3 servants. Our valets are well armed and yours seems to be tough enough." "I have never seen him put to the test," replied Raoul, "but he is a Breton, which promises something." Yes, resumed de Guiche, "I am sure he can fire a musket when required. On my side I have 2 sure men, who have been in action with my father. We therefore represent 6 fighting men. If we should meet a little troop of enemies, equal or even superior in number to our own, shall we charge them, Raoul?" "Certainly, sir," replied the Viscount. "Hullo, young people, stop there," said the tutor, joining in the conversation. "Zounds, how you maneuver my instructions. Count, you seem to forget the orders I received to conduct you safe and sound to His Highness the Prince. Once with the army you may be killed at your good pleasure, but until that time I warn you that in my capacity of general of the army I shall order a retreat and turn my back on the first red coat we come across." De Guiche and Raoul glanced at each other, smiling. They arrived at Blaine without accident. There they inquired and learned that the prince had in reality quitted Bethune and stationed himself between Cambria and La Venthie. Therefore, leaving directions at every place for Grimaud, they took a crossroad which conducted the little troop by the bank of a small stream flowing into the Lys. The country was beautiful, intersected by valleys as green as the emerald. Here and there they passed little copses crossing the path which they were following. In anticipation of some ambuscade in each of these little woods, the tutor places 2 servants at the head of the band, thus forming the advance guard. Himself and the 2 young men represented the body of the army, whilst Olivain, with his rifle upon his knee and his eyes upon the watch, protected the rear. They had observed for some time before them, on the horizon, a rather thick wood, and when they had arrived at a distance of 100 steps from it, Monsieur d'Armings took his usual precautions and sent on in advance the Count's 2 grooms. The servants had just disappeared under the trees, followed by the tutor, and the young men were laughing and talking about 100 yards off. Olivain was at the same distance in the rear, when suddenly there resounded 5 or 6 musket shots. The tutor cried halt. The young men obeyed, pulling up their steeds, and at the same moment the 2 valets were seen returning at a gallop. The young men, impatient to learn the cause of the firing, spurred on toward the servants. The tutor followed them. "Were you stopped?" eagerly inquired the 2 youths. "No," replied the servants. "It is even probable that we have not been seen. The shots were fired about 100 paces in advance of us, in the thickest part of the wood, and we returned to ask your advice." "My advice is this," said Monsieur d'Armings, "and if needs be, my will, that we beat a retreat. There may be an ambuscade concealed in this wood." "Did you see nothing there?" asked the Count. "I thought I saw," said one of the servants, "horsemen dressed in yellow, creeping along the bed of the stream." "That's it," said the tutor. "We have fallen in with a party of Spaniards. Come back, sirs, back." The 2 youths looked at each other, and at this moment a pistol shot and cries for help were heard. Another glance between the young men convinced them both that neither had any wish to go back, and as the tutor had already turned his horse's head, they both spurred forward, Raoul crying, follow me, Olivain, and the Count de Guiche, follow Urban and Planchet. And before the tutor could recover from his surprise, they had both disappeared into the forest. Whilst they spurred their steeds, they held their pistols ready also. In 5 minutes they arrived at the spot whence the noise had proceeded, and then restraining their horses, they advanced cautiously. "Hush!" whispered de Guiche. "These are cavaliers." "Yes, 3 on horseback and 3 who have dismounted." "Can you see what they are doing?" "Yes, they appear to be searching a wounded or dead man." "It is some cowardly assassination," said de Guiche. "They are soldiers, though," resumed de Bragelonne. "Yes, skirmishers, that is to say, highway robbers." "Et them," cried Raoul. "Et them," echoed de Guiche. "Oh, gentlemen, gentlemen, in the name of heaven," cried the poor tutor. But he was not listened to, and his cries only served to arouse the attention of the Spaniards. The men on horseback at once rushed at the 2 youths, leaving the 3 others to complete the plunder of the dead or wounded travelers. For on approaching nearer, instead of 1 extended figure, the young men discovered 2. De Guiche fired the first shot at 10 paces and missed his man, and the Spaniard, who had advanced to meet Raoul, aimed in his turn, and Raoul felt a pain in the left arm, similar to that of a blow from a whip. He let off his fire but 4 paces. Struck in the breast and extending his arms, the Spaniard fell back on the crupper, and the terrified horse, turning around, carried him off. Raoul at this moment perceived the muzzle of a gun pointed at him, and remembering the recommendation of Athos, he, with the rapidity of lightning, made his horse rear as the shot was fired. His horse bounded to one side, losing its footing, and fell, entangling Raoul's leg under its body. The Spaniard sprang forward and seized the gun by its muzzle, in order to strike Raoul on the head with the butt. In the position in which Raoul lay, unfortunately, he could neither draw his sword from the scabbard nor his pistols from their holsters. The butt end of the musket hovered over his head, and he could scarcely restrain himself from closing his eyes, when with one bound Guiche reached the Spaniard and placed a pistol at his throat. "Yield," he cried, "or you are a dead man." The musket fell from the soldier's hands, who yielded on the instant. Guiche summoned one of his grooms, and delivering the prisoner into his charge, with orders to shoot him through the head if he attempted to escape, he leaped from his horse and approached Raoul. "Faith, sir," said Raoul, smiling, although his pallor betrayed the excitement consequent on a first affair, "you are in a great hurry to pay your debts and have not been long under any obligation to me. Without your aid," continued he, repeating the Count's words, "I should have been a dead man, thrice dead." "My antagonist took flight," replied de Guiche, "and left me at liberty to come to your assistance. But are you seriously wounded? I see you are covered with blood." "I believe," said Raoul, "that I have got something like a scratch on the arm. If you will help me to drag myself from under my horse, I hope nothing need prevent us continuing our journey." Monsieur d'Armings and Olivain had already dismounted and were attempting to raise the struggling horse. At last Raoul succeeded in drawing his foot from the stirrup and his leg from under the animal, and in a second he was on his feet again. "Nothing broken?" asked de Guiche. "Faith, no, thank heaven," replied Raoul. "But what has become of the poor wretches whom these scoundrels were murdering? I fear we arrived too late. They have killed them, I think, and taken flight, carrying off their booty. My servants are examining the bodies." "Let us go and see whether they are quite dead, or if they can still be helped," suggested Raoul. "Olivain, we have come into possession of 2 horses, but I have lost my own. Take for yourself the better of the 2 and give me yours." They approached the spot where the unfortunate victims lay. Chapter 31. The Monk. 2 men lay prone upon the ground, one bathed in blood and motionless, with his face toward the earth. This one was dead. The other leaned against a tree, supported there by the 2 valets, and was praying fervently, with clasped hands and eyes raised to heaven. He had received a ball in his thigh, which had broken the bone. The young men first approached the dead man. "He is a priest," said Bragelonne. "He has worn the tonsure." "Oh, the scoundrels! To lift their hands against a minister of God." "Come here, sir," said Urban, an old soldier who had served under the Cardinal Duke in all his campaigns. "Come here. There is nothing to be done with him, whilst we may perhaps be able to save the other." The wounded man smiled sadly. "Save me? Oh, no," said he, "but help me to die, if you can." "Are you a priest?" asked Raoul. "No, sir." "I ask, as your unfortunate companion appeared to me to belong to the church." "He is the curate of Bethune, sir, and was carrying the holy vessel belonging to his church, and the treasure of the chapter, to a safe place, the prince having abandoned our town yesterday. And as it was known that bands of the enemy were prowling about the country, no one dared to accompany the good man, so I offered to do so. And, sir," continued the wounded man, "I suffer much and would like, if possible, to be carried to some house." "Where you can be relieved?" asked de Guiche. "No, where I can confess." "But perhaps you are not so dangerously wounded as you think," said Raoul. "So," replied the wounded man, "believe me, there is no time to lose. The ball has broken the thigh bone and entered the intestines." "Are you a surgeon?" asked de Guiche. "No, but I know a little about wounds, and mine, I know, is mortal. Try, therefore, either to carry me to some place where I may see a priest, or take the trouble to send one to me here. It is my soul that must be saved. As for my body, it is lost. To die whilst doing a good deed, it is impossible. God will help you." "Gentlemen, in the name of heaven," said the wounded man, collecting all his forces, as if to get up, "let us not lose time in useless words. Either help me to gain the nearest village, or swear to me on your salvation that you will send me the first monk, the first cure, the first priest you may meet. But," he added in a despairing tone, "perhaps no one will dare to come, for it is known that the Spaniards are ranging through the country, and I shall die without absolution. My God, good God, good God," added the wounded man, in an accent of terror which made the young men shudder. "You will not allow that? That would be too terrible." "Calm yourself, sir," replied de Guiche. "I swear to you, you shall receive the consolation that you ask. Only tell us where we shall find a house at which we can demand aid, and a village from which we can fetch a priest." "Thank you, and God reward you. About half a mile from this, on the same road, there is an inn, and about a mile further on, after leaving the inn, you will reach the village of Greeny. There you must find the curate, or if he is not at home, go to the convent of the Augustines, which is the last house on the right, and bring me one of the brothers, monk or priest. It matters not, provided only that he has received from Holy Church the power of absolving in articulo mortis." "Monsieur d'Armings," said de Guiche, "remain beside this unfortunate man and see that he is removed as gently as possible. The Vicomte and myself will go and find a priest." "Go, sir," replied the tutor, "but in heaven's name do not expose yourself to danger." "Do not fear. Besides, we are safe for today. You know the axiom, non bias in idem." "Courage, sir," said Raoul to the wounded man. "We are going to execute your wishes." "May heaven prosper you," replied the dying man, with an accent of gratitude impossible to describe. The two young men galloped off in the direction mentioned, and in 10 minutes reached the inn. Raoul, without dismounting, called to the host and announced that a wounded man was about to be brought to his house, and begged him in the meantime to prepare everything needful. He desired him also, should he know in the neighborhood any doctor or chirurgeon, to fetch him, taking on himself the payment of the messenger. The host, who saw two young noblemen, richly clad, promised everything they required, and our two cavaliers, after seeing that preparations for the reception were actually begun, started off again and proceeded rapidly toward Greeny. They had gone rather more than a league and had begun to descry the first houses of the village, the red-tiled roofs of which stood out from the green trees which surrounded them, when, coming toward them mounted on a mule, they perceived a poor monk, whose large hat and grey worsted dress made them take him for an Augustine brother. Chance for once seemed to favor them in sending what they were so assiduously seeking. He was a man about 22 or 23 years old, but who appeared much older from ascetic exercises. His complexion was pale, not that deadly pallor which is a kind of neutral beauty, but of a bilious, yellow hue. His colorless hair was short and scarcely extended beyond the circle formed by the hat around his head, and his light blue eyes seemed destitute of any expression. "So," began Raoul, with his usual politeness, "are you an ecclesiastic?" "Why do you ask me that?" replied the stranger, with a coolness which was barely civil. "Because we want to know," said de Guiche haughtily. The stranger touched his mule with his heel and continued his way. In a second de Guiche had sprung before him and barred his passage. "Answer, sir," exclaimed he. "You have been asked politely, and every question is worth an answer. I suppose I am free to say or not to say who I am to two strangers who take a fancy to ask me." It was with difficulty that de Guiche restrained the intense desire he had of breaking the monk's bones. "In the first place," he said, making an effort to control himself, "we are not people who may be treated anyhow. My friend there is a Viscount of Bragelonne, and I am the Count de Guiche. Nor is it from caprice we ask the question, for there is a wounded and dying man who demands the succor of the church. If you be a priest, I conjure you in the name of humanity to follow me to aid this man. If you be not, it is a different matter, and I warn you in the name of courtesy, of which you appear profoundly ignorant, that I shall chastise you for your insolence." The pale face of the monk became so livid and his smile so strange that Raoul, whose eyes were still fixed upon him, felt as if this smile had struck to his heart like an insult. "He is some Spanish or Flemish spy," said he, putting his hand to his pistol. A glance, threatening and transient as lightning, replied to Raoul. "Well, sir," said de Guiche, "are you going to reply?" "I am a priest," said the young man. "Then, father," said Raoul, forcing himself to convey a respect by speech that did not come from his heart, "if you are a priest you have an opportunity, as my friend has told you, of exercising your vocation. At the next inn you will find a wounded man, now being attended by our servants, who has asked the assistance of a minister of God." "I will go," said the monk, and he touched his mule. "If you do not go, sir," said de Guiche, "remember that we have two steeds able to catch your mule and the power of having you seized wherever you may be, and then I swear your trial will be summary. One can always find a tree and a cord." The monk's eye again flashed, but that was all. He merely repeated his phrase, "I will go," and he went. "Let us follow him," said de Guiche. "It will be the surest plan." "I was about to propose so doing," answered de Bragelonne. In the space of 5 minutes, the monk turned around to ascertain whether he was followed or not. "You see," said Raoul, "we have done wisely." "What a horrible face that monk has," said de Guiche. "Horrible," replied Raoul, "especially in expression." Yes, said de Guiche, "a strange face. But these monks are subject to such degrading practices. Their fasts make them pale, the blows of the discipline make them hypocrites, and their eyes become inflamed through weeping for the good things of this life we common folk enjoy, but they have lost." "Well," said Raoul, "the poor man will get his priest. But, by heaven, the penitent appears to me to have a better conscience than the confessor. I confess I am accustomed to priests of a very different appearance." "Ah!" exclaimed de Guiche, "you must understand that this is one of those wandering brothers who go begging on the high road until some day a benefice falls down from heaven on them. They are mostly foreigners, Scotch, Irish, or Danish. I have seen them before." "As ugly?" "No, but reasonably hideous." "What a misfortune for the wounded man to die under the hands of such a friar." "Sure," said de Guiche. "Absolution comes not from him who administers it, but from God. However, for my part, I would rather die unshriven than have anything to say to such confessor. You are of my opinion, are you not, Viscount? And I see you playing with the pommel of your sword, as if you had a great inclination to break the Holy Father's head." "Yes, Count, it is a strange thing and one which might astonish you, but I feel an indescribable horror at the sight of yonder man. Have you ever seen a snake rise up on your path?" "Never," answered de Guiche. "Well, It has happened to me to do so in our Blazoir forest, and I remember that the first time I encountered one with its eyes fixed upon me, curled up, swinging its head and pointing its tongue, I remained fixed, pale, and as though fascinated, until the moment when the Comte de la Fere. Your father? Asked de Guiche. No, my guardian, replied Raoul, blushing. Very well. Until the moment when the Comte de la Fere, resumed Raoul, said, Come, Bragelonne, draw your sword. Then only I rush upon the reptile and cut it in two, just at the moment when it was rising on its tail and hissing, ere it sprang upon me. Well, I vow I felt exactly the same sensation at sight of that man when he said, Why do you ask me that? And looked so strangely at me. Then you regret that you did not cut your serpent in two morsels. Faith, yes, almost, said Raoul. They had now arrived within sight of the little inn and could see on the opposite side the procession bearing the wounded man and guided by Monsieur Diamings. The youth spurred on. There's the wounded man, said de Guiche, passing close to the Augustine brother. Be good enough to hurry yourself a little, Monsieur Monk. As for Raoul, he avoided the monk by the whole width of the road and passed him, turning his head away in repulsion. The young men rode up to the wounded man to announce that they were followed by the priest. He raised himself to glance in the direction which they pointed out, saw the monk, and fell back upon the litter, his face illumined by joy. And now, said the youths, we have done all we can for you, and as we are in haste to rejoin the prince's army, we must continue our journey. You will excuse us, sir, but we are told that a battle is expected, and we do not wish to arrive the day after it. Go, my young sirs, said the sick man, and may you both be blessed for your piety. You have done for me, as you promised, all that you could do. As for me, I can only repeat, may God protect you and all dear to you. So, said de Guiche to his tutor, we will precede you, and you can rejoin us on the road to Cambrin. The host was at his door, and everything was prepared, bed, bandages, and lint, and a groom had gone to Lens, the nearest village, for a doctor. Everything, said he to Raoul, shall be done as you desire, but you will not stop to have your wound dressed. Oh, my wound, mine, 'tis nothing, replied the Viscount. It will be time to think about it when we next halt. Only have the goodness, should you see a cavalier who makes inquiries about a young man on a chestnut horse followed by a servant, to tell him, in fact, that you have seen me, but that I have continued my journey and intend to dine at Maisengard and to stop at Cambrin. This cavalier is my attendant. Would it not be safer and more certain if I should ask him his name and tell him yours? Demanded the host. There is no harm in over-precaution. I am the Viscount de Bragelonne, and he is called Grimaud. At this moment the wounded man arrived from one direction and the monk from the other, the latter dismounting from his mule and desiring that it should be taken to the stables without being unharnessed. Sir Monk, said de Guiche, confess well that brave man, and be not concerned for your expenses or for those of your mule. All is paid. Thanks, monsieur, said the monk, with one of those smiles that made Bragelonne shudder. Come, Count, said Raoul, who seemed instinctively to dislike the vicinity of the Augustine. Come, I feel here. And the two young men spurred on. The litter, borne by two servants, now entered the house. The host and his wife were standing on the steps. Whilst the unhappy man seemed to suffer dreadful pain, and yet to be concerned only to know if he was followed by the monk. At sight of this pale, bleeding man, the wife grasped her husband's arm. Well, what's the matter? Asked the latter. Are you going to be ill just now? No, but look, replied the hostess, pointing to the wounded man. I ask you if you recognize him. That man, wait a bit. Ah, I see you know him, exclaimed the wife, for you have become pale in your turn. Truly, cried the host, misfortune is coming on our house. It is a former executioner of Bethune. The former executioner of Bethune, murmured the young monk, shrinking back and showing on his countenance the feeling of repugnance which his penitent inspired. Monsieur Diamings, who was at the door, perceived his hesitation. Sir Monk, said he, Whether he is now or has been an executioner, this unfortunate being is nonetheless a man. Render to him, then, the last service he can by any possibility ask of you, and your work will be all the more meritorious." The monk made no reply, but silently wended his way to the room where the two valets had deposited the dying man on a bed. Dalminges and Olivain and the two grooms then mounted their horses, and all four started off at a quick trot to rejoin Raoul and his companion. Just as the tutor and his escort disappeared in their tone, a new traveler stopped on the threshold of the inn. "What does your worship want?" demanded the host, pale and trembling from the discovery he had just made. The traveler made a sign as if he wished to drink, and then pointed to his horse and gesticulated like a man who is brushing something. "Diable," said the host to himself, "this man seems dumb. And where will your worship drink?" "They," answered the traveler, pointing to the table. "I was mistaken," said the host. "'He's not quite dumb. And what else does your worship wish for?" "To know if you have seen a young man pass, 15 years of age, mounted on a chestnut horse and followed by a groom." "The Viscount de Bragelonne?" "Just so." "Then you are cold, Monsieur Grimaud." The traveler made a sign of assent. "Well, then," said the host, "your young master was here a quarter of an hour ago. He will dine at Mazingarbe and sleep at Cambrin." "How far is Mazingarbe?" 2 miles and a half. "Thank you." Grimaud was drinking his wine silently and had just placed his glass on the table to be filled a second time, when a terrific scream resounded from the room occupied by the monk and the dying man. Grimaud sprang up. "What is it?" said he. "Whence comes that cry?" "From the wounded man's room," replied the host. "What wounded man?" "The former executioner of Bethune, who has just been brought in here, assassinated by Spaniards, and who is now being confessed by an Augustine friar." "The old executioner of Bethune," muttered Grimaud, "a man between 55 and 60, tall, strong, swarthy, black hair and beard." "That is he, except that his beard has turned gray and his hair is white. Do you know him?" asked the host. "I have seen him once," replied Grimaud, a cloud darkening his countenance at the picture so suddenly summoned to the bar of recollection. At this instant a second cry, less piercing than the first, but followed by prolonged groaning, was heard. The three listeners looked at one another in alarm. "We must see what it is," said Grimaud. "It sounds like the cry of one who is being murdered," murmured the host. "Mon Dieu," said the woman, crossing herself. If Grimaud was slow in speaking, we know that he was quick to act. He sprang to the door and shook it violently, but it was bolted on the other side. "Open the door," cried the host. "Open it instantly, Sir Monk." No reply. "Unfasten it, or I will break it in," said Grimaud. The same silence. And then, ere the host could oppose his design, Grimaud seized a pair of pincers he perceived in a corner and forced a bolt. The room was inundated with blood, dripping from the mattresses upon which lay the wounded man. Speechless, the monk had disappeared. "The monk?" cried the host. "Where's the monk?" Grimaud sprang toward an open window which looked into the courtyard. "He has escaped by this means," exclaimed he. "Do you think so?" said the host, bewildered. "Boy, see if the mule belonging to the monk is still in the stable." "There is no mule," cried he to whom this question was addressed. The host clasped his hands and looked around him suspiciously. Whilst Grimaud knit his brows and approached the wounded man, whose worn, hard features awoke in his mind such awful recollections of the past. "There can be no longer any doubt but that it is himself," said he. "Does he still live?" inquired the innkeeper. Making no reply, Grimaud opened the poor man's jacket to feel if the heart beat, whilst the host approached in his turn. But in a moment they both fell back, the host uttering a cry of horror and Grimaud becoming pallid. The blade of a dagger was buried up to the hilt in the left side of the executioner. "Run, run for help," cried Grimaud, "and I will remain beside him here." The host quitted the room in agitation, and as for his wife, she had fled at the sound of her husband's cries. Chapter 32. The Absolution. This is what had taken place. We have seen that it was not of his own free will, but, on the contrary, very reluctantly, that the monk attended the wounded man who had been recommended to him in so strange a manner. Perhaps he would have sought to escape by flight had he seen any possibility of doing so. He was restrained by the threats of the two gentlemen and by the presence of their attendants, who doubtless had received their instructions. And besides, he considered it most expedient, without exhibiting too much ill will, to follow to the end his role as confessor. The monk entered the chamber and approached the bed of the wounded man. The executioner searched his face with a quick glance peculiar to those who are about to die and have no time to lose. He made a movement of surprise and said, "Father, you are very young." "Men who bear my robe have no age," replied the monk dryly. "Alas, speak to me more gently. Father, in my last moments I need a friend." "Do you suffer much?" asked the monk. "Yes, but in my soul much more than in my body." "We will save your soul," said the young man. "But are you really the executioner of Bethune, as these people say?" "That is to say," eagerly replied the wounded man, who doubtless feared that the name of executioner would take from him the last help that he could claim. "That is to say, I was, but am no longer. It is 15 years since I gave up the office. I still assist at executions, but no longer strike the blow myself. No, indeed." "You have, then, a repugnance to your profession?" "So long as I struck in the name of the law and of justice, my profession allowed me to sleep quietly, sheltered as I was by justice and law. But since that terrible night when I became an instrument of private vengeance, and when with personal hatred I raised a sword over one of God's creatures, since that day—" The executioner paused and shook his head with an expression of despair. "Tell me about it," said the monk, who, sitting on the foot of the bed, began to be interested in a story so strangely introduced. "Ah!" cried the dying man, with all the effusiveness of a grief declared after long suppression. I have sought to stifle remorse by 20 years of good deeds. I have assuaged the natural ferocity of those who shed blood. On every occasion I have exposed my life to save those who were in danger, and I have preserved lives in exchange for that I took away. That is not all. The money gained in the exercise of my profession I have distributed to the poor. I have been assiduous in attending church, and those who formerly fled from me have become accustomed to seeing me. All have forgiven me. Some have even loved me. But I think that God has not pardoned me, for the memory of that execution pursues me constantly, and every night I see that woman's ghost rising before me." "A woman? You have assassinated a woman?" then cried the monk. "You also," exclaimed the executioner. "You use that word which sounds ever in my ears. Assassinated." "I have assassinated, then, and not executed. I am an assassin, then, and not an officer of justice." And he closed his eyes with a groan. The monk doubtless feared that he would die without saying more, for he exclaimed eagerly, "Go on, I know nothing. As yet, when you have finished your story, God and I will judge." "Oh, Father," continued the executioner, without opening his eyes, as if he feared on opening them to see some frightful object, "it is especially when night comes on and when I have to cross a river, that this terror which I have been unable to conquer comes upon me. It then seems as if my hand grew heavy, as if the cutlass was still in its grasp, as if the water had the color of blood, and all the voices of nature, the whispering of the trees, the murmur of the wind, the lapping of the wave, united in a voice tearful, despairing, terrible, crying to me, 'Place for the justice of God.'" "Delirium," murmured the monk, shaking his head. The executioner opened his eyes, turned toward the young man and grasped his arm. "Delirium," he repeated. "Delirium, do you say? Oh, no, I remember too well. It was evening. I had thrown the body into the river, and those words which my remorse repeats to me are those which I in my pride pronounced. After being the instrument of human justice, I aspired to be that of the justice of God. But let me see, how was it done?" "Speak," said the monk. "It was at night. A man came to me and showed me an order, and I followed him, for other noblemen awaited me. They led me away masked. I reserved the right of refusing if the office they required of me should seem unjust. We traveled 5 or 6 leagues, serious, silent, and almost without speaking. At length, Through the window of a little hut, they showed me a woman sitting, leaning on a table, and said, "There is a person to be executed." "Horrible," said the monk. "And you obeyed?" "Father, that woman was a monster. It was said that she had poisoned her second husband. She had tried to assassinate her brother-in-law. She had just poisoned a young woman who was a rival, and before leaving England she had, it was believed, caused a favorite of the king to be murdered." "Buckingham?" cried the monk. "Yes, Buckingham." "The woman was English. Then—" "No, she was French, but she had married in England." The monk turned pale, wiped his brow, and went and bolted the door. The executioner thought that he had abandoned him and fell back, groaning, upon his bed. "No, no, I am here," said the monk, quickly coming back to him. "Go on. Who were those men?" "One of them was a foreigner, English, I think. The 4 others were French and wore the uniform of musketeers." "Their names?" asked the monk. "I don't know them, but the 4 other noblemen called the Englishman my lord." "Was the woman handsome?" "Young and beautiful." "Oh, yes, especially beautiful. I see her now, as on her knees at my feet, with her head thrown back, she begged for life. I have never understood how I could have laid low a head so beautiful, with a face so pale." The monk seemed agitated by a strange emotion. He trembled all over. He seemed eager to put a question which yet he dared not ask. At length, with a violent effort at self-control, "The name of that woman," he said. "I don't know what it was. As I have said, she was twice married, once in France, the second time in England." "She was young, you say?" 25 years old. "Beautiful?" "Ravishingly." "Blonde?" "Yes." "Abundance of hair, falling over her shoulders?" "Yes." "Eyes of an admirable expression?" "When she chose." "Oh, yes, it is she." "A voice of strange sweetness." "How do you know it?" The executioner raised himself on his elbow and gazed with a frightened air at the monk, who became livid. "And you killed her?" the monk exclaimed. "You were the tool of those cowards who dared not kill her themselves? You had no pity for that youthfulness, that beauty, that weakness? You killed that woman? Alas, I have already told you, Father, that woman, under that angelic appearance, had an infernal soul, and when I saw her, when I recalled all the evil she had done to me—" "To you? What could she have done to you? Come, tell me." "She had seduced and ruined my brother, a priest. She had fled with him from a convent." "With your brother?" "Yes, my brother was her first lover, and she caused his death." "Oh, Father, do not look in that way at me." "Oh, I am guilty. Then you will not pardon me?" The monk recovered his usual expression. "Yes, yes," he said, "I will pardon you if you tell me all." "Oh," cried the executioner, "oh, oh, oh." "Answer, then. If she seduced your brother, you said she seduced him, did you not?" "Yes." "If she caused his death, you said that she caused his death." "Yes," repeated the executioner. "Then you must know what her name was as a young girl." "Oh, mon Dieu," cried the executioner, "I think I am dying. Absolution. Father, absolution. Tell me her name and I will give it." "Her name was—" "My God, have pity on me," murmured the executioner, and he fell back on the bed, pale, trembling, and apparently about to die. "Her name," repeated the monk, bending over him as if to tear from him the name if he would not utter it. "Her name. Speak, or no absolution." The dying man collected all his forces. The monk's eyes glittered. "Anne de Buell," murmured the wounded man. "Anne de Buell," cried the monk, standing up and lifting his hands to heaven. "Anne de Buell. You said Anne de Buell, did you not?" "Yes, yes, that was her name. And now absolve me, for I am dying." "I absolve you," cried the priest, with a laugh which made the dying man's hair stand on end. "I absolve you? I am not a priest. You are not a priest, cried the executioner. What, then, are you? I am about to tell you, wretched man. Oh, mon Dieu. I am John Francis de Winter. I do not know you, said the executioner. Wait, wait, you are going to know me. I am John Francis de Winter, he repeated, and that woman, well, that woman was my mother. The executioner uttered the first cry, that terrible cry which had been first heard. Oh, pardon me, he murmured. If not in the name of God, at least in your own name. If not as priest, then as son. Pardon you, cried the pretended monk. Pardon you. Perhaps God will pardon you, but I never. For pity's sake, said the executioner, extending his arms. No pity for him who had no pity. Die, impenitent, die in despair, die and be damned. And drawing a poniard from beneath his robe, he thrust it into the breast of the wounded man, saying, Here is my absolution. Then was heard that second cry, not so loud as the first, and followed by a long groan. The executioner, who had lifted himself up, fell back upon his bed. As to the monk, without withdrawing the poniard from the wound, he ran to the window, opened it, leaped out into the flowers of a small garden, glided onward to the stable, took out his mule, went out by a back gate, ran to a neighboring thicket, threw off his monkish gab, took from his valise a complete habiliment of a cavalier, clothed himself in it, went on foot to the first post, secured there a horse, and continued with a loose rein his journey to Paris. Chapter 33. Grimaud speaks. Grimaud was left alone with the executioner, who in a few moments opened his eyes. Help, help, he murmured. Oh, God, have I not a single friend in the world who will aid me either to live or to die? Take courage, said Grimaud. They are gone to find assistance. Who are you? Asked the wounded man, fixing his half-opened eyes on Grimaud. An old acquaintance, replied Grimaud. You? And the wounded man sought to recall the features of the person now before him. Under what circumstances did we meet? He asked again. One night, 20 years ago, my master fetched you from Bethune and conducted you to Armentières. I know you well now, said the executioner. You were one of the 4 grooms. Just so. Where do you come from now? I was passing by and drew up at this inn to rest my horse. They told me the executioner of Bethune was here and wounded, when you uttered 2 piercing cries. At the first we ran to the door, and at the second forced it open. And the monk? Exclaimed the executioner. Did you see the monk? What monk? The monk that was shut in with me. No, he was no longer here. He appears to have fled by the window. Was he the man that stabbed you? Yes, said the executioner. Grimaud moved as if to leave the room. What are you going to do? Asked the wounded man. He must be apprehended. Do not attempt it. He has revenged himself and has done well. Now I may hope that God will forgive me, since my crime is expiated. Explain yourself, said Grimaud. The woman whom you and your master commanded me to kill. Milady? Yes, Milady, it is true you called her thus. What has the monk to do with this Milady? She was his mother. Grimaud trembled and stared at the dying man in a dull and leaden manner. His mother, he repeated. Yes, his mother. But does he know the secret? Then I mistook him for a monk and revealed it to him in confession. Unhappy man, cried Grimaud, whose face was covered with sweat at the bare idea of the evil results such a revelation might cause. Unhappy man, you named no one, I hope. I pronounced no name, for I knew none, except his mother's, as a young girl, and it was by this name that he recognized her, but he knows that his uncle was among her judges. Thus speaking, he fell back exhausted. Grimaud, wishing to relieve him, advanced his hand toward the hilt of the dagger. Touch me not, said the executioner. If this dagger is withdrawn, I shall die. Grimaud remained with his hand extended. Then, striking his forehead, he exclaimed, Oh, If this man should ever discover the names of the others, my master is lost. Haste! Haste to him and warn him, cried the wounded man. If he still lives, warn his friends, too. My death, believe me, will not be the end of this atrocious misadventure. Where was the monk going? Asked Grimaud. Toward Paris. Who stopped him? Two young gentlemen who were on their way to join the army, and the name of one of whom I heard his companion mention, the Viscount de Bragelonne. And it was this young man who brought the monk to you? Then it was the will of God that it should be so, and this it is which makes it all so awful, continued Grimaud. And yet that woman deserved her fate. Do you not think so? On one's deathbed the crimes of others appear very small in comparison with one's own, said the executioner, and falling back exhausted he closed his eyes. Grimaud was reluctant to leave the man alone, and yet he perceived the necessity of starting at once to bear these tidings to the Comte de la Fère. Whilst he thus hesitated, the host re-entered the room, followed not only by a surgeon, but by many other persons, whom curiosity had attracted to the spot. The surgeon approached the dying man, who seemed to have fainted. "We must first extract the steel from the side," said he, shaking his head in a significant manner. The prophecy which the wounded man had just uttered recurred to Grimaud, who turned away his head. The weapon, as we have already stated, was plunged into the body to the hilt, and as the surgeon, taking it by the end, drew it forth, the wounded man opened his eyes and fixed them on him in a manner truly frightful. When at last the blade had been entirely withdrawn, a red froth issued from the mouth of the wounded man, and a stream of blood spouted afresh from the wound when he at length drew breath. Then, fixing his eyes upon Grimaud with a singular expression, the dying man uttered the last death rattle and expired. Then Grimaud, lifting the dagger from a pool of blood which was gliding along the room, to the horror of all present, made a sign to the host to follow him, paid him with a generosity worthy of his master, and again mounted his horse. Grimaud's first intention had been to return to Paris, but he remembered the anxiety which his prolonged absence might occasion Raoul, and reflecting that there were now only 2 miles between the Vicomte and himself, and a quarter of an hour's riding would unite them, and that the going, returning, and explanation would not occupy an hour, he put spurs to his horse, and a few minutes after had reached the only inn of Mazingarbe. Raoul was seated at table with the Count de Guiche and his tutor, when all at once the door opened and Grimaud presented himself, travel-stained, dirty, and sprinkled with the blood of the unhappy executioner. "Grimaud, my good Grimaud!" exclaimed Raoul, "here you are at last. Excuse me, sirs, this is not a servant, but a friend. How did you leave the Count?" continued he. "Does he regret me a little? Have you seen him since I left him? Answer, for I have many things to tell you, too. Indeed, the last 3 days some odd adventures have happened. But what is the matter? How pale you are! And blood, too. What is this?" "It is the blood of the unfortunate man whom you left at the inn and who died in my arms." "In your arms? That man? But know you who he was?" "He used to be the headsman of Bethune." "You knew him? And he is dead?" "Yes." "Well, sir," said Darminges, "it is a common lot. Even an executioner is not exempted. I had a bad opinion of him the moment I saw his wound, and since he asked for a monk, you know that it was his opinion, too, that death would follow." At the mention of the monk, Grimaud became pale. Come, continued Darminges, to dinner, for like most men of his age and generation, he did not allow sentiment or sensibility to interfere with a repast. "You are right, sir," said Raoul. "Come, Grimaud, order dinner for yourself, and when you have rested a little we can talk." "No, sir, no," said Grimaud. "I cannot stop a moment. I must start for Paris again immediately." "What? You start for Paris? You are mistaken. It is Olivain who leaves me. You are to remain." "On the contrary, Olivain is to stay and I am to go. I have come for nothing else but to tell you so." "But what is the meaning of this change?" "I cannot tell you." "Explain yourself." "I cannot explain myself." "Come, tell me, what is the joke?" "Monsieur le Vicomte knows that I never joke." "Yes, But I know also that Monsieur le Comte de la Fere arranged that you were to remain with me and that Olivain should return to Paris. I shall follow the Count's directions. Not under present circumstances, monsieur. Perhaps you mean to disobey me. Yes, monsieur, I must. You persist? Then, yes, I am going. May you be happy, monsieur. And Grimaud saluted and turned toward the door to go out. Raoul, angry and at the same time uneasy, ran after him and seized him by the arm. Grimaud, he cried, remain, I wish it. Then, replied Grimaud, you wish me to allow Monsieur le Comte to be killed. He saluted and made a movement to depart. Grimaud, my friend, said the Viscount, will you leave me thus, in such anxiety? Speak, speak, in heaven's name. And Raoul fell back trembling upon his chair. I can tell you but one thing, sir, for the secret you wish to know is not my own. You met a monk, did you not? Yes. The young men looked at each other with an expression of fear. You conducted him to the wounded man, and you had time to observe him, and perhaps you would know him again were you to meet him. Yes, yes, cried both young men. Very well. If ever you meet him again, wherever it may be, whether on the high road or in the street or in a church, anywhere that he or you may be, put your foot on his neck and crush him without pity, without mercy, as you would crush a viper or a scorpion. Destroy him utterly and quit him not until he is dead. The lives of 5 men are not safe, in my opinion, as long as he is on the earth. And without adding another word, Grimaud, profiting by the astonishment and terror into which he had thrown his auditors, rushed from the room. 2 minutes later, the thunder of a horse's hoofs was heard upon the road. It was Grimaud on his way to Paris. When once in the saddle, Grimaud reflected on 2 things. First, that at the pace he was going his horse would not carry him 10 miles, and secondly, that he had no money. But Grimaud's ingenuity was more prolific than his speech, and therefore at the first halt he sold his steed, and with the money obtained from the purchase took post horses. Chapter 34. On the eve of battle. Raoul was aroused from his somber reflections by his host, who rushed into the apartment crying out, "The Spaniards! The Spaniards!" That cry was of such importance as to overcome all preoccupation. The young men made inquiries and ascertained that the enemy was advancing by way of Houdin and Bethune. While Monsieur d'Armings gave orders for the horses to be made ready for departure, the 2 young men ascended to the upper windows of the house and saw in the direction of Marsin and of Lens a large body of infantry and cavalry. This time it was not a wandering troop of partisans. It was an entire army. There was therefore nothing for them to do but to follow the prudent advice of Monsieur d'Armings and beat a retreat. They quickly went downstairs. Monsieur d'Armings was already mounted. Olivain had ready the horses of the young men, and the lackeys of the Count de Guiche guarded carefully between them the Spanish prisoner, mounted on a pony which had been bought for his use. As a further precaution, they had bound his hands. The little company started off at a trot on the road to Cambrin, where they expected to find the prince. But he was no longer there, having withdrawn on the previous evening to La Bassée, misled by false intelligence of the enemy's movements. Deceived by this intelligence, he had concentrated his forces between Vieille-Chapelle and La Venthie, and after a reconnaissance along the entire line, in company with Marshal de Gramont, he had returned and seated himself before a table, with his officers around him. He questioned them as to the news they had each been charged to obtain, but nothing positive had been learned. The hostile army had disappeared 2 days before and seemed to have gone out of existence. Now an enemy is never so near and consequently so threatening as when he has completely disappeared. The prince was, therefore, contrary to his custom, gloomy and anxious, when an officer entered and announced to Marshal de Gramont that someone wished to see him. The Duc de Gramont received permission from the prince by a glance and went out. The prince followed him with his eyes and continued looking at the door. No one ventured to speak, for fear of disturbing him. Suddenly a dull and heavy noise was heard. The prince leaped to his feet, extending his hand in the direction whence came the sound. There was no mistaking it. It was the noise of cannon. Everyone stood up. At that moment the door opened. "Monseigneur," said Marshal de Gramont, with a radiant face, "will your highness permit my son, Count de Guiche, and his traveling companion, Viscount de Bragelonne, to come in and give news of the enemy, whom they have found while we were looking for him. What, eagerly replied the prince, will I permit? I not only permit, I desire, let them come in. The marshal introduced the two young men and placed them face to face with the prince. Speak, gentlemen, said the prince, saluting them. First speak. We shall have time afterward for the usual compliments. The most urgent thing now is to learn where the enemy is and what he is doing. It fell naturally to the Count de Guiche to make reply. Not only was he the elder, but he had been presented to the prince by his father. Besides, he had long known the prince, whilst Raoul now saw him for the first time. He therefore narrated to the prince what they had seen from the inn at Mazengaub. Meanwhile, Raoul closely observed the young general, already made so famous by the battles of Rocroi, Freiburg, and Nordlingen. Louis de Bourbon, Prince de Condé, who, since the death of his father, Henri de Bourbon, was called, in accordance with the custom of that period, Monsieur le Prince, was a young man, not more than 26 or 27 years old, with the eye of an eagle, agil occhi grifani, as Dante says, aquiline nose, long, waving hair, of medium height, well-formed, possessed of all the qualities essential to the successful soldier, that is to say, the rapid glance, quick decision, fabulous courage. At the same time, he was a man of elegant manners and strong mind, so that in addition to the revolution he had made in war, by his new contributions to its methods, he had also made a revolution at Paris, among the young noblemen of the court, whose natural chief he was and who, in distinction from the social leaders of the ancient court, modeled after Bassompierre, Bellegarde, and the Duc d'Angoulême, were called the Petits Maîtres. At the first words of the Count de Guiche, the prince, having in mind the direction whence came the sound of cannon, had understood everything. The enemy was marching upon Lens, with the intention, doubtless, of securing possession of that town and separating from France the army of France. But in what force was the enemy? Was it a corps sent out to make a diversion? Was it an entire army? To this question de Guiche could not respond. Now, as these questions involved matters of gravest consequence, it was these to which the prince had especially desired an answer, exact, precise, positive. Raoul conquered the very natural feeling of timidity he experienced in approaching the prince. "My lord," he said, "will you permit me to hazard a few words on that subject, which will perhaps relieve you of your uncertainty?" The prince turned and seemed to cover the young man with a single glance. He smiled on perceiving that he was a child hardly 15 years old. "Certainly, monsieur, speak," he said, softening his stern, accented tones, as if he were speaking to a woman. "My lord," said Raoul, blushing, "might examine the Spanish prisoner." "Have you a Spanish prisoner?" cried the prince. "Yes, my lord." "Ah, that is true," said de Guiche. "I had forgotten it." "That is easily understood. It was you took him, Count," said Raoul, smiling. The old marshal turned toward the Viscount, grateful for that praise of his son, whilst the prince exclaimed, "The young man is right. Let the prisoner be brought in." Meanwhile, the prince took de Guiche aside and asked him how the prisoner had been taken and who this young man was. "Monsieur," said the prince, turning toward Raoul, "I know that you have a letter from my sister, Madame de Longueville, but I see that you have preferred commending yourself to me by giving me good counsel." "My lord," said Raoul, coloring up, "I did not wish to interrupt your highness in a conversation so important as that in which you were engaged with the count. But here's the letter." "Very well," said the prince, "give it to me later. Here is the prisoner. Let us attend to what is most pressing." The prisoner was one of those military adventurers who sold their blood to whoever would buy, and grew old in stratagems and spoils. Since he had been taken, he had not uttered a word, so that it was not known to what country he belonged. The prince looked at him with unspeakable distrust. "Of what country are you?" asked the prince. The prisoner muttered a few words in a foreign tongue. Ah, it seems that he is a Spaniard. Do you speak Spanish, Grandmorne?" "Faith, my lord, but indifferently." "And I not at all," said the prince, laughing. "Gentlemen," he said, turning to those who were near him. "Can any one of you speak Spanish and serve me as interpreter?" "I can, my lord," said Raoul. "Ah, you speak Spanish. Enough, I think, to fulfill your highness's wishes on this occasion." Meanwhile, the prisoner had remained impassive, and as if he had no understanding of what was taking place. "My lord asks of what country you are," said the young man, in the purest Castilian. "Ich bin ein Deutscher," replied the prisoner. "What in the devil does he say?" asked the prince. "What new gibberish is that?" "He says he is German, my lord," replied Raoul. "But I doubt it, for his accent is bad and his pronunciation defective." "Then you speak German also?" asked the prince. "Yes, my lord." "Well enough to question him in that language." "Yes, my lord." "Question him, then." Raoul began the examination, but the result justified his opinion. The prisoner did not understand, or seemed not to understand, what Raoul said to him, and Raoul could hardly understand his replies, containing a mixture of Flemish and Alsatian. However, amidst all the prisoner's efforts to elude a systematic examination, Raoul had recognized his natural accent. "Non siete Spagnuolo," he said. "Non siete Tedesco, siete Italiano." The prisoner started and bit his lips. "Ah, that," said the prince. "I understand that language thoroughly, and since he is Italian, I will myself continue the examination." "Thank you, Viscount," continued the prince, laughing, "and I appoint you from this moment my interpreter." But the prisoner was not less unwilling to respond in Italian than in the other languages. His aim was to elude the examination. Therefore, he knew nothing either of the enemy's numbers, or those in command, or the purpose of the army. "Very good," said the prince, understanding the reason of that ignorance. "The man was caught in the act of assassination and robbery. He might have purchased his life by speaking. He doesn't wish to speak. Take him out and shoot him." The prisoner turned pale. The two soldiers who had brought him in took him, each by one arm, and led him toward the door, whilst the prince, turning to Marshal de Grandmorne, seemed to have already forgotten the order he had given. When he reached the threshold of the door, the prisoner stopped. The soldiers, who knew only their orders, attempted to force him along. "One moment," said the prisoner in French. "I am ready to speak, my lord." "Ah, said the prince, laughing. "I thought we should come to that. I have a sure method of limbering tongues. Young men, take advantage of it against the time when you may be in command. But on condition," continued the prisoner, "that your highness will swear that my life shall be safe." "Upon my honor," said the prince. "Question, then, my lord. Where did the army crystallize?" "Between St. Venant and A." "By whom is it commanded?" "By Count de Fuensaldagna, General Beck, and the Archduke." "Of how many does it consist?" 18,000 men and 36 cannon. "And its aim is?" "Lands." "You see, gentlemen," said the prince, turning with a triumphant air toward Marshal de Grandmorne and the other officers. "Yes, my lord," said the marshal, "you have divined all that was possible to human genius. Recall Laplessis, Believer, Villequier, and Durlec," said the prince. "Recall all the troops that are on this side of the lies. Let them hold themselves in readiness to march tonight. Tomorrow, according to all probability, we shall attack the enemy. But, my lord," said Marshal de Grandmorne, "consider that when we have collected all our forces, we shall have hardly 13,000 men." "Monsieur le Maréchal," said the prince, with that wonderful glance that was peculiar to him, "it is with small armies that great battles are won." Then turning toward the prisoner, "Take away that man," he said, "and keep him carefully in sight. His life is dependent on the information he has given us. If it is true, he shall be free. If false, let him be shot." The prisoner was led away. "Count de Guiche," said the prince, "it is a long time since you saw your father. Remain here with him. Monsieur," he continued, addressing Raoul, "if you are not too tired, follow me." "To the end of the world, my lord," cried Raoul, feeling an unknown enthusiasm for that young general who seemed to him so worthy of his renown. The prince smiled. He despised flatterers, but he appreciated enthusiasts. "Come, monsieur," he said, "you are good in counsel, as we have already discovered. Tomorrow we shall know if you are good in action." "And I," said the marshal, "what am I to do?" "Wait here to receive the troops. I shall either return for them myself, or shall send a courier directing you to bring them to me. 20 guards, well mounted, are all that I shall need for my escort." "That is very few," said the marshal. "It is enough," replied the prince. "Have you a good horse, Monsieur de Bragelonne?" "My horse was killed this morning, my lord, and I am mounted provisionally on my lackeys. Choose for yourself in my stables the horse you like best. No false modesty. Take the best horse you can find. You will need it this evening. Perhaps. You will certainly need it tomorrow." Raoul didn't wait to be told twice. He knew that with superiors, especially when those superiors are princes, the highest politeness is to obey without delay or argument. He went down to the stables, picked out a piebald Andalusian horse, settled and bridled it himself, for Athos had advised him to trust no one with those important offices at a time of danger, and went to rejoin the prince, who at that moment mounted his horse. "Now, monsieur," he said to Raoul, "will you give me the letter you have brought?" Raoul handed the letter to the prince. "Keep near me," said the latter. The prince threw his bridle over the pommel of the saddle, as he was wont to do when he wished to have both hands free, unsealed the letter of Madame de Longueville, and started at a gallop on the road to Lens, attended by Raoul and his small escort, whilst messengers sent to recall the troops set out with a loose rein in other directions. The prince read as he hastened on. "Monsieur," he said, after a moment, "they tell me great things of you. I have only to say, after the little that I have seen and heard, that I think even better of you than I have been told." Raoul bowed. Meanwhile, as the little troop drew nearer to Lens, the noise of the cannon sounded louder. The prince kept his gaze fixed in the direction of the sound with the steadfastness of a bird of prey. One would have said that his gaze could pierce the branches of trees which limited his horizon. From time to time his nostrils dilated as if eager for the smell of powder, and he panted like a horse. At length they heard the cannon so near that it was evident they were within a league of the field of battle, and at a turn of the road they perceived the little village of Ornay. The peasants were in great commotion. The report of Spanish cruelty had gone out, and every one was frightened. The women had already fled, taking refuge in Vitry. Only a few men remained. On seeing the prince, they hastened to meet him. One of them recognized him. "Ah, my lord," he said, "have you come to drive away those rascal Spaniards and those Lorraine robbers?" "Yes," said the prince, "if you will serve me as guide." "Willingly, my lord. Where does your highness wish to go?" "To some elevated spot whence I can look down on Lens and the surrounding country." "In that case, I'm your man." "I can trust you. You are a true Frenchman." "I am an old soldier of Rocroi, my lord." "Hey," said the prince, handing him a purse, "here is for Rocroi. Now, do you want a horse, or will you go afoot?" "Afoot, my lord. I have served always in the infantry. Besides, I expect to lead your highness into places where you will have to walk." "Come, then," said the prince, "let us lose no time." The peasant started off, running before the prince's horse. Then, 100 steps from the village, he took a narrow road hidden at the bottom of the valley. For a half-league they proceeded thus, the cannon shots sounding so near that they expected at each discharge to hear the hum of the bowls. At length they entered a path which, going out from the road, skirted the mountainside. The prince dismounted, ordered one of his aides and Raoul to follow his example, and directed the others to await his orders, keeping themselves meanwhile on the alert. He then began to ascend the path. In about 10 minutes they reached the ruins of an old chateau. Those ruins crowned the summit of a hill which overlooked the surrounding country. At a distance of hardly a quarter of a league they looked down on Lens, at bay, and before Lens the enemy's entire army. With a single glance the prince took in the extent of country that lay before him, from Lens as far as Vimy. In a moment the plan of the battle, which on the following day was to save France the second time from invasion, was unrolled in his mind. He took a pencil, tore a page from his tablets, and wrote, "My dear Marshal, in an hour Lens will be in the enemy's possession. Come and rejoin me. Bring with you the whole army. I shall be at Vending to place it in position. Tomorrow we shall retake Lens and beat the enemy." Then, turning toward Raoul, "Go, monsieur," he said. "Ride fast and give this letter to Monsieur de Grandmorne." Raoul bowed, took the letter, went hastily down the mountain, leaped on his horse, and set out at a gallop. A quarter of an hour later he was with the marshal. A portion of the troops had already arrived, and the remainder was expected from moment to moment. Marshal de Grandmorne put himself at the head of all the available cavalry and infantry and took the road to Vending, leaving the Duc de Chatillon to await and bring on the rest. All the artillery was ready to move, and started off at a moment's notice. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when the marshal arrived at the appointed place. The prince awaited him there. As he had foreseen, Lens had fallen into the hands of the enemy immediately after Raoul's departure. The event was announced by the cessation of the firing. As the shadows of night deepened, the troops summoned by the prince arrived in successive detachments. Orders were given that no drum should be beaten, no trumpet sounded. At 9 o'clock the night had fully come. Still a last ray of twilight lighted the plain. The army marched silently, the prince at the head of the column. Presently the army came in sight of Lens. 2 or 3 houses were in flames, and a dull noise was heard which indicated what suffering was endured by a town taken by assault. The prince assigned to everyone his post. Marshal de Grandmorne was to hold the extreme left, resting on Méricourt. The Duc de Chatillon commanded the center. Finally, the prince led the right wing, resting on Aulnay. The order of battle on the morrow was to be that of the positions taken in the evening. Each one, on awaking, would find himself on the field of battle. The movement was executed in silence and with precision. At 10 o'clock everyone was in his appointed position. At 10:30 the prince visited the posts and gave his final orders for the following day. 3 things were especially urged upon the officers, who were to see that the soldiers observed them scrupulously. The first, that the different corps should so march that cavalry and infantry should be on the same line, and that each body should protect its gaps. The second, to go to the charge no faster than a walk. The third, to let the enemy fire first. The prince assigned the Count de Guiche to his father and kept Bragelonne near his own person. But the 2 young men sought the privilege of passing the night together, and it was accorded them. A tent was erected for them near that of the marshal. Although the day had been fatiguing, neither of them was inclined to sleep. And besides, even for old soldiers the evening before a battle is a serious time. It was so with greater reason to 2 young men who were about to witness for the first time the terrible spectacle. On the evening before a battle, one thinks of 1,000 things forgotten till then. Those who are indifferent to one another become friends, and those who are friends become brothers. It need not be said that if in the depths of the heart there is a sentiment more tender, it reaches then, quite naturally, the highest exaltation of which it is capable. Some sentiment of this kind must have been cherished by each one of these 2 friends, for each of them almost immediately sat down by himself at an end of the tent and began to write. The letters were long. The 4 pages were covered with closely written words. The writers sometimes looked up at each other and smiled. They understood without speaking. Their organizations were so delicate and sympathetic. The letters being finished, each put his own into 2 envelopes, so that no one, without tearing the first envelope, could discover to whom the second was addressed. Then they drew near to each other and smilingly exchanged their letters. "In case any evil should happen to me," said Bragelonne. "In case I should be killed," said de Guiche. They then embraced each other like 2 brothers, and each wrapping himself in his cloak, they soon passed into that kindly sleep of youth which is a prerogative of birds, flowers, and infants. Chapter 35. A dinner in the old style. The second interview between the former musketeers was not so formal and threatening as the first. Athos, with his superior understanding, wisely deemed that the supper table would be the most complete and satisfactory point of reunion, and at the moment when his friends, in deference to his deportment and sobriety, dared scarcely speak of some of their former good dinners. He was the first to propose that they should all assemble around some well-spread table and abandon themselves unreservedly to their own natural character and manners, a freedom which had formerly contributed so much to that good understanding between them which gave them the name of the inseparables. For different reasons, this was an agreeable proposition to them all, and it was therefore agreed that each should leave a very exact address, and that upon the request of any of the associates a meeting should be convoked at a famous eating house in the Rue de la Monnaie, of the sign of the Hermitage. The first rendezvous was fixed for the following Wednesday, at 8 o'clock in the evening precisely. On that day, in fact, the four friends arrived punctually at the hour, each from his own abode occupation. Porthos had been trying a new horse. D'Artagnan was on guard at the Louvre. Aramis had been to visit one of his penitents in the neighborhood, and Athos, whose domicile was established in the Rue Guénégaud, found himself close at hand. They were, therefore, somewhat surprised to meet all together at the door of the Hermitage, Athos starting out from the Pont Neuf, Porthos by the Rue de la Rue, D'Artagnan by the Rue des Fosses Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, and Aramis by the Rue de Béthesy. The first words exchanged between the four friends, on account of the ceremony which each of them mingled with their demonstration, was somewhat forced, and even the repast began with a kind of stiffness. Athos perceived this embarrassment, and by way of supplying an effectual remedy, called for 4 bottles of champagne. At this order, given in Athos's habitually calm manner, the face of the Gascon relaxed and Porthos's brow grew smooth. Aramis was astonished. He knew that Athos not only never drank, but more, that he had a kind of repugnance to wine. This astonishment was doubled when Aramis saw Athos fill a bumper and toss it off with all his former enthusiasm. His companions followed his example. In a very few minutes, the 4 bottles were empty, and this excellent specific succeeded in dissipating even the slightest cloud that might have rested on their spirits. Now the 4 friends began to speak loud, scarcely waiting till one had finished before another began, and each assumed his favorite attitude on or at the table. Soon, strange fact, Aramis undid 2 buttons of his doublet, seeing which, Porthos unfastened his entirely. Battles, long journeys, blows given and received, sufficed for the first themes of conversation, which turned upon the silent struggle sustained against him who was now called the Great Cardinal. "Faith," said Aramis, laughing, "we have praised the dead enough. Let us revile the living a little. I should like to say something evil of Mazarin. Is it permissible?" Go on, replied D'Artagnan, laughing heartily. "Relate your story, and I will applaud it if it is a good one." "A great prince," said Aramis, "with whom Mazarin sought an alliance, was invited by him to send him a list of the conditions on which he would do him the honor to negotiate with him. The prince, who had a great repugnance to treat with such an ill-bred fellow, made out a list against the grain and sent it. In this list there were 3 conditions which displeased Mazarin, and he offered the prince 10,000 crowns to renounce them." "Ah, how?" laughed the 3 friends. "Not a bad bargain, and there was no fear of being taken at his word. What did the prince do then?" "The prince immediately sent 50,000 francs to Mazarin, begging him never to write to him again, and offered 20,000 francs more, on condition that he would never speak to him." "What did Mazarin do?" "Stormed," suggested Athos. "Beat the messenger," cried Porthos. "Accepted the money," said D'Artagnan. "You have guessed it," answered Aramis, and they all laughed so heartily that the host appeared in order to inquire whether the gentlemen wanted anything. He thought they were fighting. At last their hilarity calmed down, and "Faith!" exclaimed D'Artagnan to the 2 friends, "you may well whistle to Mazarin, for I assure you, on his side he wishes you no good." "Pooh! Really?" asked Athos. "If I thought the fellow knew me by my name, I would be rebaptized, for fear it might be thought I knew him." "He knows you better by your actions than your name. He is quite aware that there are 2 gentlemen who greatly aided the escape of Monsieur de Beaufort, and he has instigated an active search for them. I can answer for it." "By whom?" "By me. And this morning he sent for me to ask me if I had obtained any information." "And what did you reply?" "That I had none as yet, but that I was to dine today with 2 gentlemen who would be able to give me some." "You told him that—" said Porthos, a broad smile spreading on his face. Bravo! And you are not afraid of that, Athos? No, replied Athos. It is not the search of Mazarin that I fear. Now, said Aramis, tell me a little what you do fear. Nothing for the present, at least nothing in good earnest. And with regard to the past, asked Porthos. Oh, the past is another thing, said Athos, sighing, the past and the future. Are you afraid for your young Raoul? Asked Aramis. Well, said D'Artagnan, one is never killed in a first engagement. Nor in the second, said Aramis. Nor in the third, returned Porthos. And even when one is killed, one rises again, the proof of which is that here we are. No, said Athos, it is not Raoul about whom I am anxious, for I trust he will conduct himself like a gentleman, and if he is killed, well, he will die bravely. But hold, should such a misfortune happen, well, Athos passed his hand across his pale brow. Well, asked Aramis. Well, I shall look upon it as an expiation. Ah, said D'Artagnan, I know what you mean. And I, too, added Aramis. But you must not think of that, Athos. What is past is past. I don't understand, said Porthos. The affair at Armentières, whispered D'Artagnan. The affair at Armentières, asked he again. Milady. Oh, yes, said Porthos. True, I had forgotten it. Athos looked at him intently. You have forgotten it, Porthos, said he. Faith, yes, it is so long ago, answered Porthos.